So before starting our coding on Node.js, let's first install our IDE. We'll be using Visual Studio Code throughout this course, and we'll be exploring some awesome extensions that will help us become a better backend developer and help us code efficiently. So for downloading the Visual Studio Code, just browse through code.visualstudio.com and select a Visual Studio Code for your device. So now that you have installed the Visual Studio Code on your system, it's time for installing some extension that will help us code efficiently. So for that, on your left hand side, go to the extensions tab, and the first extension that we will be installing is ESLint. Search for ESLint and you'll be presented with some of the extensions, and you can install the first extension that pops up here. So click at install and wait for a while. So what ESLint actually does, it recognizes the patterns and find errors and bugs on our JavaScript code as we type. So it will help us write error-free codes and can help us debug issues faster. So this is the most important extension that any JavaScript developer can have. So after installing this, let's move to our next extension. So the next extension we'll be installing is a Prettier extension. So on search bar, type Prettier, P-R-E-T-T-I-E-R, and you'll be presented with some of the plugins, and as usual, click at the first plugin and click on install. So what Prettier does is, as the name implies, it makes our code prettier. Prettier is a code formatter that takes care of all the indentations, makes our code easy to read, easy to understand, and more organized. So there's one more step involved in activating the Prettier for our Visual Studio Code. For that, click at File, go to Preferences, click at Settings, and type Format on Save. Once you type Format on Save, you can see these options, and you must check this option. What we are saying is we are allowing the Prettier to format our code or lines of codes once we save the file. So this is the first step. The next step is to select the Prettier as our default formatter. For that, clear the source bar and type Formatter. So you can see this first option, the default formatter is none, make it Prettier. So by performing these steps, what we are doing is we are allowing the Prettier to be our default formatter and asking the Prettier to format our codes each time we save the file. So now that we are done with Prettier, let's close all the windows or all the tabs and search for another extension. So the next extension we'll be installing is the ErrorLens extension. So as usual, click at the first one and click at install. So what ErrorLens actually does is it highlights the warnings and errors in our JavaScript code as we type. It shows the error side by side, so we know exactly where the error is occurring, which will help us write error-free codes and help us debug faster. So these three extensions, ESLint, Prettier, and ErrorLens, are the most important extensions for any JavaScript developers. Now there are a couple of other extensions that I'll be talking about, but these are totally optional. You can opt out of not installing them, but I do recommend that you install these as well. So the first extension will be Material Icon Theme. So what this does, it makes our working directory beautiful. Beautiful in the sense that it provides an icon, material icon, for each of our file system type. So if you are prompted with select icon file theme dialog, then click at material icon theme, or simply you can click at set file icon theme and you can select material icon theme. So the next extension we will be installing, or the optional extension that we will be installing, is the Oceanic theme. So this theme is totally a personal preference. You don't need to install this, but if you are like me, have trouble working at night, then this would be a go-to theme for you. So click at install, and after installing you should be prompted with the dialog to apply the theme, and I personally like this dimmed busy one. So click at this and you are done. So I believe this extension that we have just installed will help you on your journey of becoming an efficient backend developer. So without further ado, let's move to our next lesson. So the next step for setting up our development environment is installing the Node.js on our device. It is a JavaScript runtime environment that enables us to run JavaScript on the server side. It also enables us to start the server and do other stuffs on our device that we'll typically do on a real online server. So for installing the Node.js, just browse in through nodejs.org and then download the long-term support version on your device. After you have downloaded the installer file, go ahead and install it. You'll be guided through a wizard, and everything is pretty straightforward, so just accept the terms and click on next. You will be installing all these things. click it next, next, and then install. So now that we have installed Node.js on our device, let's verify that the Node.js has been installed successfully. For that, go to command prompt or the terminal and type node-version. It is a version check for Node. And if you see the version of the Node.js that you just installed, then the Node.js is working fine. And we are ready for our development of our backend. So if Node.js version check is working on your device, then you have successfully installed and the Node.js is up and running on your device. There is no additional configurations required. So by installing the Node.js, what we did is we created an environment for the JavaScript to be executed on the server side, which will help us create a server and do other backend stuffs. So after the Node.js has been installed, we are ready for our journey of the backend development. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So before diving into the coding of Node.js, let's first understand what Node.js is. So if you look into the typical behavior of the JavaScript, most of the JavaScript codes are executed by the browser on the client side, right? What Node.js does, it creates the environment in which the JavaScript can thrive and execute on the backend or on the server side. Why? Because it enables the JavaScript to access the stuffs that were not previously available to JavaScript. For instance, accessing the file system of your server. There was no way for the JavaScript to access the file system if it was only running on the browser side, right? But Node.js enables the JavaScript to access the things like file system and many different other stuff that we will typically need for the backend development. What enables the Node.js for doing so? How does it create the environment? Is Node.js is built, it is JavaScript runtime built on Google V8 JavaScript engine, which creates an environment for the JavaScript to be executed on the server side. But in simple terms, we can say that the Node.js is the backend that is built on the JavaScript. So now that we have a basic understanding of what Node.js is and what it does, let's create our first web server. For that, I have created a directory. You can go ahead and create any directory that you want. I've created a Node.js playground on one of my devices. So now what you need to do is you need to open this directory on your Visual Studio Code. For doing so, launch the Visual Studio Code and click at File and open the folder. Navigate through your folder or navigate through the directory that we just created and that we'll be working on and select a folder. After that, Visual Studio Code restarts, and what it does, it opens the folder for you. So in our working directory, let's create a new file. Right click and create a new file. We'll say index.js. Index.js is the entry point for our Node.js app. So index.js being our entry point, we will place all the server codes in index.js and we will try to execute it from the Node.js. So let's get started and create our first web server. For that, we need a built-in package called HTTP in our project or in this file. So let's import. So const HTTP is, we need to require the default package called HTTP on our file. So I'll create another variable called const server equals to, now we will be using this HTTP to create a server. So HTTP dot create server, which is a function. And the next step we need to do is we need to listen the incoming request from our client or from the user. So for doing so, let's write server.listen. Now first parameter would be the port that we'll be listening. So typically in Node.js we use 8000 ports, so let's write 8000. And the second parameter would be the host name. For now, just write localhost. And the third parameter will be a callback function if the server is successfully listening to port 8000. So in third parameter, when the server is successfully started, let's console.log server is started, right? So now let's try executing this code on our Node.js. For doing so, click at terminal and click at new terminal. When the terminal starts on our directory, type node and then the entry folder or entry file. So in our case, it will be index.js. So as you can see, we have successfully started the Node.js server, right? So let's open our browser and see what localhost 8000 is currently doing. So open up your browser and go to localhost and semicolon and port 8000. So localhost 8000 keeps on running and doesn't provide any response. Why is this? Because we have not done anything for providing the response to our client. So let's go ahead and provide a server response to our clients from our server. For doing so, we need to go into the HTTP create server method, and inside of it will be a arrow function which will have a request and response that is used by the server to communicate with the client. So this would be a arrow function. In arrow function, we will be writing res.end, and we'll be providing the response hello from the server, right? Now we'll be explaining in detail about request and response, or REQ and RES, in the upcoming lessons. But for now, what we are doing is we are sending a response to our client from our server. So let's save this, and then what we are going to do is we are going to restart the server. For restarting the server, you need to click Control C or Command C, and you need to exit this, and then again node index.js, right? And again the server is started, and let's go to the localhost 8000 and refresh the page. And as you can see, it says hello from the server. Congratulations, you have successfully created a first web server. Now let's move into the next lesson. So now that we have learned how to start our first web server, it's now time for us to make that server dynamic in nature. Currently our server is static in nature. Why do I say that? Because every time a client request on our server sends a request to our server, every time we reply with them with the text hello from the server, right? We are not detecting the user request, we are doing nothing, we are just responding with hello from the server. This is not a typical how typical server works, right? For instance, if I go into the localhost 8000, it's completely fine that I get hello from the server, but when I go to the localhost 8000 slash cars, I will want a list of cars, right? Not hello from server every time. Yes, this is a static server, or we are sending only one data no matter where the user goes, anywhere in our URL or anywhere in between the localhost 8000, every time they get hello from the server. This is not how typical website or the server backend works, right? What backend does, it is accept the request of the user and then provide the data accordingly. So what we need to do is we need to detect what request are we getting so that we can fulfill the request and provide the response accordingly. So for that, let's see what request we are getting. So for that, we are doing console.log request. Let's see what request we are getting for now. So we have changed our code. So let's restart our server. ctrl-c will restart the server. So node index.js. So as server is started, let's refresh this page. First, let's go to localhost 8000. So when I go to localhost 8000, what you can see here is we get a lot of requests, right? Now the only thing relevant here to us for dynamic routing our server is request.url. You can go through every request information, right? But for now we will look into the request.url. So let's save it. So restart our server once saved, and then node index.js again. Server is started. So let's go ahead and refresh this page. So when I land into localhost 8000, what you can see here is we only get the slash mark over here. And if I go to localhost 8000 slash cars, what I get on console is slash cars. Now that we have the request or the route that user is trying to go, we can dynamically provide the response. We can provide the response in a conditional manner. So how can we do that is if request.url URL equals slash cars. If user is going to slash cars, then what we'll do is we'll send rest.send and this is cars, right? And if user goes to I'll write this with else if request.url slash fruits, then we'll send the response this is for fruits, right? And if the URL is not declared over here, we'll just do else, and then we'll send hello from the server. Let me minimize this a bit and save this code. As you can see here, code is a bit non-organized, right? It is indentation are not making any sense, but when I save this, the prettier does its magic and it organizes the code. That's why we install the prettier. So now the changes have been made in our code. Let's restart the server and then again node index.js. So if I go into the localhost 8000, right? Hello from the server. If I go into localhost 8000 slash cars, this is for cars. And then if I go to fruits, and then this is for fruits. And then if I go to animal, then again it is hello from the server because it came back into the fallback request. So this is how we handle or how we dynamic route a server, right? This in this case we have listened to the user request and we have provided response according to the request, and this is how the typical server works, right? So you might have noticed when our code base becomes larger, when we do different types of stuff from our backend, this routing part will be very difficult to maintain because each route may have different controllers, it may have different functionalities and so on, and the routes may be 100 if not thousands, right? So it will be very difficult for us to maintain. So there is an easier way for us to do so, an easier way for us to start the server and work on the server, and this is provided by the Express. Now in the next lesson we will be learning and we will be using Express for developing a server and for routing the server, and throughout this course we will be using Express, and I'll explain you how Express will help us build a scalable Node.js applications and why we use Express instead of reusing the inbuilt package HTTP. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be learning about Express, why it is the widely used framework for Node.js, and what is Node Package Manager. Till now, what we have done is we have created our first web server. We have listened to the user request and provide data accordingly, or we can say it, we have dynamic routed a server. And then I highlighted the problem that if our code base becomes more and more complex and there are hundreds and thousands of routings and each have its own controllers and functionalities, the code will be very much complex and it will be difficult for us to create scalable applications. So instead of depending on the HTTP inbuilt module of the Node.js, what we will do is we'll use Express for the creation of our server and for handling requests and providing the response. Now, Express is a popular web application framework for Node.js that is built in top of the HTTP module. What Express does is it uses the HTTP, but it provides us an easier interface for us to handle the request and provide the response. It also helps us simplify the process of building the web applications. Express offers features like routing, middleware support, request and response handling. These all stuff that will help us make our server more scalable in the long run and organized in the process. So instead of using HTTP, what we will do is we will replace it with Express. Now Express is a package, and for installing these types of package and different other packages we need Node Package Manager. So let's have a look about what Node Package Manager or NPM is. NPM stands for Node Package Manager and it is a huge online repository of pre-built and reusable code. For instance, we are trying to use Express in our project now, right? So Express is built on top of the HTTP module. Someone or some team developed Express framework so that developers like us can use it for scaling our server and to make our code organized and more effective, right? So someone has already done the job for us. So NPM or package manager or this repository is the way for us to get those packages, so we do not have to reinvent the wheel and spend too much time on things that are already built. So let's go ahead and search for Express. If you want any other package, you can search those packages as well. But for now, let's search for Express. So type Express and click at search. And you can see that the Express is available as an open source on NPM. So you can install this Express through Node Package Manager or NPM. So for that, what we need to do is we need to initialize the Node Package Manager in our project. So how can you do that? Is let's open our code and then let's close all the terminals, start a new terminal, fresh terminal, and then what we can do here is we can type npm Node Package Manager init. What it does, it is initialize the Node Package Manager and makes it ready to use on our directory. So npm init has started doing its job. It is asking for the package name and Node.js Playground is great for me. If you want any other thing, you can just type in here. For now, I'll just press enter a couple of times, and then it will initialize a dummy project in our directory. So enter a couple of times. There's nothing to worry about in this, just enter will do fine. By initializing the npm in our project, what we have done is we have enabled our project to get advantage of thousands and millions of open source packages, right? Now you might have noticed there have been created a new file over here, the package.json. This is the file that will be created by npm init. Nothing to worry about. There are some of the codes over here that we will go through each of them individually. But for now, what we need to do is we need to install the Express. So let's go ahead and type npm install Express. So this is the code for installing the package. So npm install Express, and then let the npm do its job. So when we installed a package, or when we did npm init, a package.json and other different folders and files were created. Now in this next lesson, we'll be explaining each and every files and folders, and I'll try to give you the clear view of each and every folder and what it does in the next lesson. So I'll see you there. So when we initialize the npm and when we install the Express package, there were some files and folders created automatically. We didn't create that, it was created by the system. So let's try to understand what they were. The first thing that we noticed is package.json file. This was created when npm init was executed in our terminal, right? So let's see what's inside package.json. So most of the lines over here are just the metadata of the project, like name, version, description, author, license are just the metadata. Main is the entry point of our project. And the two things I want to stress on this lesson is the scripts and dependencies. So let's first understand about the dependencies, and then we'll go to the scripts. So in dependencies, you can see that Express. What does it mean? It means that our project is dependent to the package Express. Without Express being installed in the system, our project will not run. So when we perform the task npm install Express, what happened was we installed the Express from the npm repository, and all the installations from the npm repository are under the node modules. So you can see that dependencies and node modules are interlinked. So when we did npm install Express, what it did was it installed the Express, it brought the open source project and it installed it here over here. So what are the other files that we see inside the node modules are Express in itself has some other dependencies, right? So for Express to run, this dependencies also needs to be installed in our system, right? So these are other dependencies that Express needs to run, and some other dependencies has other dependencies that they need to install for running. So these are a bunch of files and folders that are important for our project to run. So you don't ever need to go inside the node modules folders and make some changes here. We only edit our code, and everything else is managed by the npm. So why is this dependency super important in a package.json? So imagine a situation. You are a developer of a company. You have started to work on a new Node.js project. Everything you write is dependent upon the Express package, right? And you are using other different packages as well. So if another developer comes and you want to share your code, how would he or she know that which dependencies you are using and which dependencies he should install for running your project, right? So these are the things that dependencies hold. Once you share this project with your colleague or with another developer, what they can do is they can run npm install and they can get all the dependencies file for the project to run successfully. So this is the important part of package.json. It not only declares the dependencies but also the version of dependencies that our project depends upon. If there are breaking changes, or if you just say that install Express and they install the Express of version 2, then that may bring some breaking changes and there may be some problems in our code. So package.json inside dependencies, there are not only the dependencies but also the version that is applicable for our project to run. So these are the important things. Another thing that is important in package.json are the scripts. So scripts in package.json allows us to define and execute various scripts for our project. We'll eventually write some scripts Till then, I don't think it is super important for me to explain in scripts in detail, because we'll use it eventually, and when we use it in our project, it will be much clearer than me just saying it without doing anything, right? So we'll see about the scripts later when we write some scripts ourselves. Another important file that you can see here is the package log.json. So what is this? It is a log file that is automatically created, which has the information about the package and the version that is required for your project to run effectively. So when you run npm install, or you install certain packages, this file get regenerated so that there will be no conflict in the future related to packages. The steps over you see over here is not super important to understand. These are things that will be taken care by the npm itself. So I believe you are clear on what are the files and folders that were generated by npm, what are node modules, what was package.json stuff inside the package.json. So by knowing this, we have opened a pathway for us to use these file systems and these modules. And in the next lesson, we will be installing the Express, and we using Express. We have already installed it. We will be using Express, and then we will redefine our code in the Express ecosystem. So I'll see you there. So after understanding npm, node modules, and package.json, we are now ready to code our server through Express. Now what we need to do is we need to replicate the index.js file by using Express instead of HTTP in build module. So let's create another file so as we can compare index.js and that file, and we can replicate the same things in our another file. So in most of our Node.js project, we keep app.js as an entry file. So let's create that file as well. So app.js. So what we are going to do is we want to compare the index and app.js. In index, we have done our server creation process with HTTP module, and in app.js, we will do it through the Express. And then we will entirely delete this index.js file and start working on app.js. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to import the HTTP, but not on app.js. We want to import Express here. So const express equals to require Express. So what this did was we brought Express in this file. So our next step is const app. This app is the Express app. We need to declare that this app is Express app. So the next step for us will be to listen the port 8000. So for that, we can write app.listen. The first parameter would be the port, 8000 port, and second parameter will be the callback function if the port listening was successful. So let's do here console.log server connected successfully. Let's save that and let's run this from Node.js, right? So for running this, what you need to do is node. Previously we did index.js, but now we will do app.js. So you can see that server connected successfully. It means that our server is initiated, our server has started from the Express. Congratulations. So another thing that we should build is the dynamic routing system. So how can we build this? Let's first start this localhost 8000 in our browser to see what response we get. So let's go with localhost 8000. So you can see that there is a custom error message that says cannot get slash. It means that there is no route defined that could handle the localhost 8000 slash route. So what we can do is we can define that route. So for that, what we can do is we can write app.get if requests are coming through only localhost 8000. Then the second parameter will be a callback function that would expect request and response, and then we'll write response.send and hello from the server, right? Now let's restart this, and again node app.js, and let's see if someone lands in our localhost 8000, will they get hello from server or not? So let me refresh. So hello from server. So we have successfully created the server from Express, and we have also sent a static data from the server, right? Now how can we use Express for dynamic routing? It is too much easier than HTTP module. So in Express, we do not need to detect the request.url and do different other stuffs. We only need to declare the route. For instance, as you can see here, if user goes to users slash cars, localhost 8000 slash cars, then they will be they will get the message this is cars, right? How can we do this in our Express app? So for this app.get, if user lands in slash cars, then same you can copy and paste this over here, and you can write here this is for cars, right? Now restart the server and node app.js, and then let's see, let's refresh it here. So in localhost 8000 hello from the server, and if I go to cars, then this is for cars. Now compare this code, right, which is readable. If there ought to be 1000 routes, then how complex this code would be, right? Each route might have some functionalities, some codes inside of them, and the page will exponentially grow, right? But in this case, you can see the code is managed, and what we can do is we can export the functions and keep this function in another file, which will make our code organized and easy to read. So this is why you are using Express. Not only this, Express has tons of other features that will be helpful for us in our development journey. So by saying this, let's delete the index.js because it is of no relevance to us, and let's move to the next lesson where we will learn different other steps of backend development. So I'll see you there. So until now, what we have done is we have created our server from Express. We have also defined the dynamic routing in our server. But it's always been a hassle for us to start our server every time we make a slightest change in our code. For instance, if I modify the response of hello from the server and keep a simple exclamation sign over here, it will be easier for me if the server restarted automatically so as to reflect the changes. If I make a slight change over here and if I refresh the response, if I refresh my browser to see the response, I see no exclamation sign here because the server is not restarted, right? So I need to manually close the server, and so from ctrl-c or command plus c, and then I need to do again node app.js. So by doing this, we are restarting the server, and now we'll be able to see the changes made in our code base. So let me go into the browser and refresh localhost 8000. So you can see that there is an exclamation sign. So if you are dealing with a few lines of codes, and if you are only handling a few requests and responses, it will not be a problem for you to restart your server manually. But as our code base increases, as we are dealing with other more request and response stuffs, and we are dealing with more number of code, it will be difficult for us to restart manually our server every time we make a slightest change in our code. So for that, we need to automate our server starting process. And for doing so, we need to install NodeMon, which monitors the changes in our code and then restarts the server automatically, so we do not have to do it manually every time we make changes in our code. So let's see how we can install NodeMon and how we can start our server through NodeMon. So if you browse into npmjs.com and search for NodeMon, you can see the explanation of the NodeMon and way to use it. So it says that NodeMon is a tool that helps develop Node.js based application by automatically restarting the Node application when file changes in the directory are detected. So this is exactly what we need, as it automates the server restarting process, so we can focus more on our code instead of restarting our server every time. So for us to install the NodeMon in our project, what we need to do is we need to go to the terminal, and then we need to repeat the same process like npm install that we did in the Express. So let's stop the server for now, and then npm install nodemon. So what it does, it brings the code from npm repository and it initializes in our project. So as the nodemon is installed in our project, we need to allow nodemon to start the server for us. For that, what we need to do is we need to go into the package.json, and then in another line of scripts part, we need to keep another line here, and then we need to write start. And when the script of start is executed, we need to run nodemon app.js. So let me explain what we just did over here. So the start script that we just wrote over here is the npm script. So when we type in our console npm start, so npm being the node package manager and start being the script, the identifier of the script, right? So if I do npm start, what it does, it navigates into the package.json. Our app navigates into package.json, it searches for the start script and then execute the script, right? So By writing the script, it allows us to do certain operations from our terminal itself. So what we have did is we have written the start script over here, and what start script does, it starts the node mon and it executes the app.js. So what exactly happens here is when we type npm start, our app navigates into package.json. It looks for the start scripts. Then what it does, it goes into the node mon that is inside our node modules. So you can see that we have a node mon file over here, as you can see here. So what it does, it navigates into the node mon file over here, our node package manager, and then through this it executes the app.js file. So let's go ahead and start the server through npm start. Now instead of doing node app.js every time, what we need to do is we need to type npm start, the script that we have just written over here. So what it did, it navigated into package.json, found the start script, and then it executed the nodemon and it started the app.js. So it nodemon says that it is started successfully and it is watching for the changes that will be made over here. So the server started successfully. If I navigated into the localhost 8000, we can see that it is hello from the server. Now let me make a slight change in our server. So instead of hello from the server, I'll write hi from the server. And if I save the code, nodemon will automatically restart our server. So if I refresh it, you can see hi from the server. So by doing this, we have automated the restarting process, and we'll be saving a lot of time, and we can focus entirely in our code instead of restarting our server every time. So by doing this, we are ready to expound our Node.js application and then dive deeper into the code of backend. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So by automating the process of restarting the server, we are now able to focus on the code and expand our knowledge on the backend development. So from this lesson onward, we will be learning about the file system module of Node.js. So what exactly file system module does, it is allows the Node.js to access the device files and folders. So if you look into the default behavior of the JavaScript that is executed on the browser side, it does not have the authority or the access to the file system or device storage. For instance, if I navigated into any site related to Wikipedia for now, if I navigated into this site and it executed certain JavaScript code, this JavaScript code does not have the authority or the access to manipulate my file system. Now it is a good thing. Why it is a good thing? Because if the JavaScript had the authority to access my file system, then it could have saved thousands and millions of files that I do not necessarily want, right? It could have saved viruses, it could have saved zip files, it could have saved PNG, JPG that I do not need. So the default behavior of the JavaScript that is executed in the browser side is that it could not save or it could not access the device storage, right? But what Node.js does, it creates an environment, the V8 engine, Google's V8 engine, on which the Node.js is built upon. It creates the environment for the JavaScript to access the device file system through our Node.js or through the JavaScript. So now, as you know, we can access the file system. Let's go ahead and create a file in our working directory. New file and data.txt over here. It is a simple text file that our server will read and it will pass through the response. It will pass it through our response. So for that, what we need to do is first we'll be learning how to read the file, and then in another video we'll be learning how to write a file in our file system. Before reading the file, let's first modify our data.txt to include some of the things over here. So let the data.txt be the name of the fruit. So let me write apple and orange and grape. So I have three fruits over here. Now what I need to do is when someone goes into the localhost 8000, instead of outputting hi from the server, I need to show the data that is inside the data.txt. So how can I do that? I can do that using the Node.js inbuilt module fs system. So for that, let's import the fs into our project. So for that, const, I do not need to npm install for it because it is the inbuilt module. So const fs, meaning the file system, is the require. Let's require it from fs, meaning the file system itself. So using the fs module, now we can read the file of data.txt. Now let me write a comment over here in Node.js. You can, or JavaScript, you can write comment through double slash. So we will read file over here, right? So after writing the comment, let's use the fs file module. So for reading the file, what we need to do is we need to write fs, meaning the file system, read file, and the first parameter will be the directory or the place where our file is located. For that, it will be dot slash is the working directory. It is the working directory that we can see over here, and in the working directory we have data.txt. So let's go ahead and write data.txt. Now what it does is it will read data from data.txt. Second parameter will be the encoding. Let's write it utf8 for now, and the third parameter is the callback function. Now it will have two parameters. The first one is error. If some error occurs, then the error will be triggered, and the second one will be data. It will, if everything is good, if it find the file and it could read the file, then the data will be triggered, or the response of the file or the contents of the file that we are reading right here will be available in the data. This is a error function. And then what it will do is we can send the response from here itself instead of sending the response from here. So rest.send, and we will be sending the data that we have just read from data.txt. Now let's remove this. Now save the file, let the prettier do its job of formatting, and then start your server. Now going to the new terminal, I have not started the server. If I had started the server, then nodemon would have restarted it. For now, npm start, which means nodemon app.js. So by doing npm start, we will be starting our server. Let's go into our browser and see the response. So it's currently saying hi from the server. It is a previous one. So if I refresh it, you can see apple, orange, and grapes that is saved in our data.txt. Now let me modify a little bit in our data.txt. So apple, orange, grapes, and the another fruit will be the mango, right? If I save into it, the Node.js does not modify because it looks only in the changes of JS, MJS, and JSON. For now, we need to configure additionally for data.txt or .txt file, but we will not do it now. What we will do is we will resave the code without any changes. By saving the code, it also assume it to be changed, so it will restart the server. And if I refresh this page, I can see apple, orange, grapes, and mango. That is the updated data of data.txt. By doing so, we can read the file using the fs module of Node.js. But what happens if I provide a URL or the file system that does not exist in our system? Let me say data.txt. Now if I refresh this, our Node.js server will not be able to detect this file. So I need to throw some error response over here, right? So for doing so, I can write if error exists. This means that if something is in the error, then what we need to do is we need to send rest.send, and then we need to type that there was an error accessing the file. So we can handle the fs system module error like this way. So let me restart the server. Let me rebrowse the file, and there is the error. There was an error accessing the file is the response that we will see, because this data does not exist in the file system. Now if I provide the valid file system, then it will be able to show us what are the contents inside the file. So in this way, we can use the fs module to read the file in our file system, and in the next lesson we'll be learning how to write file in our file system using the fs module. So I'll see you there. So now that we have understood how we can read file from the file system using the fs module of Node.js, in this lesson we'll be learning how you can write a content to the file in the file system through fs module of the Node.js. So for that, I'm going to use this route, but instead of /cars, I'll be writing /write. So if someone goes to the localhost 8000 /write, instead of reading the data, we'll be writing to a data. So for that, instead of sending the response of this is for cars, I'll be using the fs module over here. So fs dot for writing the file, we need this function fs write file. The first parameter will be the same one as the read file, meaning the working directory, and then the file data.txt. We will be writing a data.txt for now. The second parameter over here would be the thing that you want to write to that file. So for now, as it is the list of the fruits, I'll be writing the cherry over there. And the third parameter, as there is nothing to return, the third parameter will be an error function that will have parameter of only error, right?
So you can see the difference between the read file and write file. In read file, there is an encoding thing that we do not use on the write file. Instead of encoding, there will be the content that you want to write into that file. And in the callback function, there is no data as there is nothing to written over here. So if this is successful, we'll be showing that response.send, or we'll be sending the response that file return data returned successfully, right? And we should also handle the error, and if anything happens or if there is a data in the error in this callback function, in this parameter, then we should write the res.send, res.send, meaning the response.send, and it would be error writing to file. So let's go ahead and test this. So for that, we need to go to the localhost 8000/write. So currently in localhost 8000, what we can see is the list of fruits that we have in data.txt. So I want to navigate into the right thing or right route, and if I press this, it will write this is for cars. But this is not the expected response that we are trying to get. So let's see in our code and what we have done wrong. So our app has also crashed, and when app crashes, when we are using the node mon, it will wait for something to change in our code so that it can start the server again. So the error that I see here is you cannot send res.send for 2 times in a same route, right? If the response is already sent, then you cannot send respond again, because the data or the response to the client is already sent, so you cannot resend it. So we had forgot to remove this line, so let's remove this line, let the node mon do its job and restart the server, and let's check the route again. So if I click or refresh this page, it will say that the data returned successfully. Now let's verify. Let's go into the data.txt and see for ourselves. So you can see cherry, but the problem over here is it has replaced all the contents that were previously here, like mango, orange, and other stuff that we had there. So how can we preserve the current data and then append the new data on the file itself? So let's learn that. So in the case you don't want to lose the previous value, instead of writing the using the code write file, you should use append file, right? What append file does, it preserves the previous values and then adds new value into it. So when someone visits the localhost 8000/write, we'll preserve the current value and then add cherry right next to it, right? So let's test this. So going to the localhost 8000/write, and then data is written successfully. And if you visit into it, the data.txt file, you can see there are 2 cherries. Now let me send the request again, and you can see that there are 3 cherries, a lot of cherries. But if you want the cherry to go into the next line, or if you want to break the line, you can also use /n over here. So let's write into that file again. So if you refresh it and if you see data.txt, you can see there is a new cherry over here. And if someone goes to localhost 8000, we have read the file and we have displayed the contents over it. The thing you should know about append file and read file is that if the file system or if the FS module could not find this file specified, the append file and write file creates that file for you, so you can write data on the new file. For instance, if I provided the file that does not exist in our system, for instance datas.txt does not exist in our system, but if I run this code anyways, localhost 8000/write, then it says that data returned successfully, right? So it creates a new file. Append file and write file creates a new file and appends data or writes data into it. So this is also the thing that you should understand. So let me delete this file for now and then revert this data to data.txt. So this is how you read and write file of the file system or the file of the server using the FS module in Node.js. What made it possible is the environment that Node.js created for the JavaScript to access the file system data. So in the next lesson, we'll be learning some of the other things, and then we'll wrap up the FS module. So I'll see you there. So there are a lot of things that we can do using the FS module of Node.js. We have only learned a few. We have learned how you can read a file, how you can write or append to a file. But if you go into the documentation of FS module, if you search for Node.js FS module and go into this documentation, you can find tons of stuff that are available for the FS module system. For instance, you can change the permissions of the file, you can read file as a stream, you can sync the file, truncate them, and different other stuffs. But we will not be learning each and every one of them. And the reason is, In Node.js, we do not use file system as often, right? We use databases to store the data, to retrieve the data, to update the data, and do other things that are related to the data. And in this course, we'll be learning about how we can use MongoDB for the storage of the data. In real world application, there is barely any system that uses the file system to save the data and to retrieve the data, right? But you might need this occasionally, so I have included this read system and write system. But in this course, fs module is not relevant and we will not be using this module in any time throughout this course. But if you are interested to learn more, you can always go to the Node.js documentation and then you can search for the fs module and then you can try out all other stuff. So instead of learning these things that we will barely use in the future, let's learn something that is relevant to us. So by saying this, let's move to the next lesson. So throughout this course, we'll be working with lots of requests and responses. We'll take requests from the client, process it in the server, and then provide the adequate response to the client. And every request and response processing will be done by an API. API stands for Application Programming Interface. And before diving into the code of API or coding the API, let's first understand what API is. So think of a restaurant for a while. When you go into the restaurant for consuming some food, do you actually go there, cook yourself, bring the food into the table by yourself and then consume it? No, you don't. You ask for the server or the waiter to bring a certain type of food from the kitchen. They bring it to you and then you consume it, right? So think API as a server or a waiter in the restaurant. What they did was they took the order from the client, right? They took the order to the kitchen provided them with the dish and they served it to you. So you can associate the server or the waiter as the API, right? So what API does in our system is it takes request from the client, it then processes it, it takes the data or the data that is relevant data from the database, and then it serves the response to you. So this is how the API works. API is an application programming interface where the client can communicate with the server or the database. The database has a lot of stuffs. So think of database as a kitchen in a restaurant. In a restaurant kitchen, there are lots of dishes being prepared simultaneously. But the only dish that is relevant to the client is the one that they ordered. So the responsibility of the API or the server or the waiter is to bring that particular dish. And this is how the API works. It gets the request from the client and provides the necessary response by processing it in the server. You might have heard about REST API before, and in this lesson, we'll be understanding what REST API is and how it is different from a normal API. REST API in itself is not a different thing. REST API is an API that has a certain design principles and set forth a ways or methods in which the client can request or send request data to the server and how the server responds to those requests. So you can say that a REST API is an improved version of API. REST API is widely used in a backend development and in the front-end development as well, because it has clear rules of how a client can communicate with the server, and it has methods which determines what things need to be done when a client requests for the certain things on the server. So let's see an example. So this is how a typical REST API works, right? The things you see over here are the methods of REST API. This is the client and this is the server where all the processing is done. So what happens at first is client request for some data or it provides some request data to the server. Now the REST API has certain methods in which it can send the data through. For instance, to get the data from the server, they should be using the get method. These are the method. For getting the data, the client should be using the get method. If they are trying to post some data on the server or keep some data on the server, they should be using the post request. If they want to create something in the server or if they want to edit it, they want to use put or patch request to the server. And if they want to delete certain data or remove certain data from the server, they should be using the delete method. So what REST API does with its design principles, is that it set forth a certain ways for the client to send request to the server. Not only that, it also help the developers, front-end developer and back-end developer work in synchronization, as it makes it easier for them and provide a standard way for the request to be sent and response to be received. It also helps multiple developers work on a single project, as everyone will be familiar with the methods and they will beforehand be able to understand what the method is doing. So by creating any standard, it facilitates the developer, reduce the development time and work in symphony. So REST API is popular, and throughout this course we will be using the REST API, and we will be using this method from Postman and through the front end to achieve what we are trying to achieve. So by saying this, I hope you have understand what REST API is, how it is different from the API. So let's move to the next lesson. So to make it easier for you to understand what API is, how API works, what are the method of REST APIs, and in general, to make it easier for you to understand how we can test an APIs, I have created a project for you. I have named it Movies Database Dummy API for Node.js. The resource file for this project can be found in the next lesson. Now this is only a test project that gives you a basic idea of how API works and how we can test in API. It is not necessary for you to understand every code that is written inside of it. It might be too complex for you now. We will be only using this project for understanding the API and API testing. In the later part of this course, we'll try to replicate this API and create an API similar to this. But for now, you do not need to understand every code that is inside of it. So simply go ahead into the next lesson and download this code, and we'll only be using this code base for testing the APIs, and I'll see you in the next lesson. So now that you have downloaded or cloned the MoviesDB dummy API, we are ready to install dependencies and make it work. So for that, open the folder in your Visual Studio Code. After opening the folder in Visual Studio Code, go to Terminal, New Terminal, and for this project to run successfully in our device, we need to install the dependencies. So navigate into package.json and see what are the dependencies that this project is dependent upon. So the first one is Express and the second one is NodeMon. So it says us that the dependencies are Express and NodeMon, and without this project will not run successfully. So for that to install, let's type in our terminal npm install. So after all the dependencies are installed, go ahead and type npm start. If everything is good, you should see server started successfully. Now navigate to your browser and type localhost 4000, because this time our app is listening at the port 4000, right? So navigating at localhost 4000, you should be able to see the documentation page for this API, which means that the server is working fine and we are ready to test this movies API on our device. So let's go ahead and see what are the API endpoints that we can test. So the documentation states that the base URL for testing our API is localhost 4000/API. The combination of base URL, the method on it, and the route is what makes the API URL complete. So let's go ahead and try our first API endpoint that says get all movies. For that, let's copy the base URL and then the route that says get all movies. So localhost 8000/API/movies, and if I browse through this URL, I can see that the API has responded me with the list of movies. So if you are using the Mozilla Firefox browser, the data on the JSON will be shown in a structured format. If you are using Chrome or any other browser, it can be shown in a raw data. It does not matter how the data is shown to you. What does matter is that API is responding fine and we are ready to test the APIs. Now what we need is an API testing platform that we can use to test all these API that are available to us. It is not a good approach to test the APIs through browser. Even if we can test the get method, it will be difficult for us in the long run to test post, patch, delete and other method of REST API through our browser. So we need an API platform where we can seamlessly test and debug our APIs. And for that, we will be installing Postman, which is an API platform that will make our API testing easier and efficient. So in our next lesson, we will be installing Postman and we will be testing these APIs through Postman. So I'll see you there.
To test the APIs and to make our process of testing API easier, we will be installing Postman. Postman is an API platform that will help us run and debug our code in an easier way. So visit postman.com on your browser and then download Postman on your device. So after downloading and installing the Postman, this is the screen that you should be presented with. If the Postman asks you to sign up, create a free account so that you can access your API code later in another devices. So after this screen is shown to you, click at new, and by clicking at new, we will start a new collection. Now that we have created a new collection, let's rename it as Movies DB. So in this collection, we will be testing our APIs. Now navigate into the Visual Studio Code, open up the project of Movies DB dummy API for Node.js, go to terminal, new terminal, and start the server. Type npm start and your server will be started. If you had previously started the server, then no need to do this. Then after the server has been started successfully, navigate into localhost 4000 to see the documentation again. So in localhost 4000, you can see the documentation. Now it's time for us to test this API from the Postman. So let's test the first API endpoint that we tested from the browser previously. So the first API endpoint is get all movies, and for that we need a base URL, we need a method, and we need a route. So let's copy the base URL localhost 4000/API. Open up your Postman and expand it. Right click on it and create add a request, or you can simply add a request from here. So add a request, right? And in the new request, you can rename it and say get all movies, right? And as you can see here, the method will be get method. So in Postman, you can see a method switcher here. So the method is get method, and the URL base URL would be localhost 4000/API, and then the route would be /movies. So the complete API route would be http localhost 4000/API/movies. So navigate into the Postman and type it here. So if any spaces are left around here, you can clear it and you can save this code. Now after you click at send, you can see the response of API over here. So you do not need to open tab every time in the browser to test an API, and you can save API in the Postman and access it faster, and you can debug your code faster. So this is how we test an API on Postman. So in next lesson, we'll be importing other routes as well and work with other route through Postman. So I'll see you there. So now that we have added get all movies API to our Postman, it's time for us to add other APIs as well. So make sure your server has started successfully and then navigate to localhost 4000 to access the documentation. Now another API that we will be adding, or another API endpoint or the route that we will be adding, is for getting a single movie. So for that, navigate into the Postman, and instead of writing everything like localhost 4000 API movies, we'll simply right click on this request and then duplicate it. And we'll rename this as get single movie. So if you see the routing of this get single movie, there is a dynamic string. By the way, if you see a curly braces like this in a documentation of an API, it means that this needs to be dynamic if it is surrounded by curly braces, right? So what our API endpoint is saying, that our API will be getting a single movie if we pass a movie ID into it. So how do you get the movie ID? We can get the movie ID by querying all the movies at first. So let's go navigate into the Postman and see the get all movies API. So you can see that in every part of this array, or the every object of this movie object has a unique ID over it, right? So what we need to do is we need to copy this ID, and if you want to see the response of get single movie as the Grand Budapest Hotel, then you need to copy this ID and then you need to paste the ID over here. As the API endpoint says in the documentation, /movies/movie ID to be a dynamic ID. So if you send this request, then you can get the Grand Budapest Hotel in the response. Let's try with another ID. So if I want to get the movie of the Intouchables, I need to copy this, and then in get single movie I need to pass this ID over here, and after sending the request I can see the Intouchables. Now let's add another important API endpoint that is for creating a movie or adding a movie in the database. Now for this we will be using a post method in a slash movies route for creating a movie. Now post method is a little different from the get method. Let's get started by adding this in a Postman. So instead of writing everything from the start, let's duplicate this at first. And after duplicating, let's rename this. Rename this as add a movie, right? And this time the request method would be a post method because we are sending some data to the server to be added. We are sending some data to be processed. So these types of data, if you want to send some data for server processing, then we will be sending through a post request. Now we also need to modify the URL of our API request, because in post request it is said that we need to query API slash movies, and this dynamic ID is not should not be provided in the post request. So we will modify our script, our API URL accordingly, and then without doing anything or without sending any payload data, let's request this at first. So if you send this, it says the movie name is required. Now this error is triggered because you are sending a request in the server for a movie data to be created, but you are not providing any parameters like movie name, rating, and information and all other informations that is required for creating a movie. If you look into the API endpoint or the API documentation, you can see that this post request requires a payload which will include the movie name, the name of the movie, which will be of type string, and then the info, which will be a type of string as well, so which is the movie info, of course, and then the rating, which should be a type of number, and the rating should be between 1 to 10. So how do you send a payload in a post request, or how do you send data to the server, is we need to navigate into the body tab, and then instead of none we should switch this to raw, and then instead of text we will be sending the JSON. So the reason for us to use the JSON for the request payload is because JSON is extremely light, the file size of the JSON is very small, and it is in the human readable format as well, and it processes faster in the server. So we'll be using JSON as in request payload. If you look into the get all movies response of the get all movies, you can also see that the response is also in the JSON. So entirely in this course we will be using JSON for sending the request and getting the responses. So using the JSON, let's send the payload that is being requested by our post route. So the first payload or the first data or the first parameter is the movie name. So for sending the movie name, let's start our JSON file. The first key would be the movie underscore name, right? And the movie name, let's say, let's let the movie name be the best offer. And the second parameter that it expects is the info. So let's write here info, and the info will be this is great movie. And the third parameter that it expects is the rating. It should be between 1 to 10. So let me write the rating over here, and it should be in the range of between 1 to 10. So I want to rate it as 9, and then click at beautify so that your JSON gets formatted, and then click as send. So if you are doing everything fine, then you should get the response of 200. Okay. Also, I have got the response of movie added successfully. So if I go into the get all movies route and then send the request or refresh the request, I can see that the best offer has been added in the database. Right. So our add a movie route is working as expected. Now there are two more routes that need to be added for editing a movie and deleting a movie that we'll be doing in the next lesson. So I'll see you there. So until now we have added three APIs, one for getting all the movies, one for getting a single movie, and one for adding a movie to the database. Now it's time for us to add the two other remaining APIs from our documentation. One is the edit movie API that is using the patch method, and another the delete movie API which is using a delete method. So before adding these routes in our Postman, I want to take a time and explain about a feature of Postman that will help you when you are working in a production or development environment and when you are handling a large number of requests in your Postman. So the feature that I'm going to talk about is the Postman environment. If you see at the left hand side of your Postman, you can see the environments. This environment will help you save certain variables so that you do not have to repeat yourself by using same variables again and again. So let me explain how it's done. So for creating an environment, you click at the plus icon,
and after that you name your environment. Let the environment be, click at rename, let the environment be development environment for now. And inside the development environment, you can declare some of the variables that you will be using throughout this environment. So the first variable we will be using is the URL variable. So the initial value will be our base URL. So http localhost 4000/API is the base URL that our documentation has given us. So for now we will be setting the URL value to be localhost 4000/API. So we will copy this and we will also paste it over here if it is not available here automatically. So initial value is localhost 4000/API and current value is 4000 API. Now save this environment and go to your collections and then switch an environment from here. Now switch to dev environment, and after you switch to dev environment, the variables will be available globally on all the requests, right? So in get all movies, instead of writing localhost 4000/APIs, you can simply replace all of these with two curly braces and then URL and /movies. So what this means is localhost 4000/API and then /movies. So we do not have to type http localhost 4000/API every time. What we have done is we have created a variable in our environment, in our dev environment, right? We have created a URL variable, and then we are using the URL variable throughout all of our requests. Now if you have multiple collection and if the environment is set to dev environment, then you can access the URL variable from anywhere from any request, right? So let's go ahead and replace other base URL as well. So copy this URL and then replace it over here as well, right? So localhost 4000/movies/movie name, movie ID. So in add movie as well, do the same thing. Now if you call this API get all movies API, you can see that you will get the same result. The advantage of using the environment or environment variables is that you do not have to repeat. Not only URL, we will be using this environment or this environment variables in authentication as well in our upcoming lessons. So I'm making you prepared for what we will be using in the future as well. So let's go ahead and create or add the routes that were missing in our requests in our Postman. So the routes that are missing is the pass route and delete route. So right click as movies DB and create add a request, right? And this will be the request for editing our movie. So edit a movie, right? And then the URL will be URL, base URL, and then the route would be /movies. So let's go ahead and type movies. And in patch, the patch will work as same as the Postman. It will also accept the payload data, and according to our documentation it says that the payload movie ID is required, and then providing the movie ID we can edit other parameters like movie name, info and rating. So the most important variable or the required variable is the movie ID. So you know how you can send the JSON request to our server. Navigate into body and then raw and then JSON, and then you can send the JSON data over here. The first variable will be movie underscore ID, and the movie ID, as you know, you can get it from the get all movies. So if we want to edit the Grand Budapest Hotel, copy this ID over here and then go to edit a movie. And I forgot to change the route or method of this request. It will be a patch request according to our documentation. Save this and then provide movie ID here, and then what you want to do is you want to send a key, or you want to say a key and value pair or the parameter to change certain request, right? So in get all movies, if you want to edit the movie underscore name, provide movie underscore name over here, right? And the movie name will be, for now the movie name is the Grand Budapest Hotel. Let's copy this, and then instead of Grand Budapest Hotel we will be replacing as English. Just editing, nothing too fancy. So if I send this request, I can see that the movie has been updated successfully. If I go to get all movies and then refresh this page or resend the request, you can see that the movie name is edited, and the variables that we can edit has been provided by the documentation. The other parameters that we can edit is movie name, info, and rating. You can also simultaneously edit two or more options. For instance, if you want to edit the rating, you can provide the rating as well. For now, let me set the rating to 2 and then send the request. After the movie has been updated successfully, let's go to get all movies, and then if you refresh this, you can see the rating has also been updated. Now that we have successfully edited the movie, it's now time for us to add the last remaining API endpoint, which is the delete movie API. So go ahead in movies DB and then add a request. This time our method is the delete, right? And the base URL is URL and then movies. And then according to our documentation, the last parameter is the dynamic string or the dynamic data, which should be the movie ID. And the way to get movie ID is to see on get all movies. And if you want to delete this Grand Budapest Hotel, copy this ID and then also rename this delete a movie and then save this. And then if you provide 50073 or the ID of the Budapest Hotel and send it, the data will be removed or the movie will be deleted from the database. And if it says movie have been removed successfully, you go to get all movies, and then if you reload this, you can see that the Grand Budapest Hotel is no longer available in our list of databases or list of movies. So now that we have added every API endpoint in our Postman and tested every API, it's now time for us to replicate the same API using the MongoDB database. In our upcoming lessons, we'll be trying to replicate this API and we'll be trying to duplicate the request and response cycle of this API using the database CRUD operations. The main reason for using this test API or testing this API was to make you understand how the request and response cycle work, how environment variable works, and many things in between. Now this has created a solid foundation for us to test the APIs. In our upcoming lessons, we will be creating the actual API through Express, MongoDB, and Node.js. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Now from this lesson onward, we will be trying to replicate the MoviesDB dummy API. We will be replicating all the API endpoints that we had tested in the Postman before. We will be working in depth with requests, responses, payload data, different routes, and this time we will be saving the data on MongoDB database instead of saving the data on JSON file using the FS module. And now to get started, let's create a new project. So for the new project, I'll be using the name Movies API using MongoDB. You are free to choose your own project name. Now let's go ahead and open this project in Visual Studio Code. So the first thing that needs to be done to start a new project is creating a new file with name app.js, which will be our entry point for the app. Now go to the terminal and start a new terminal, and in this project also we will be using the Express, MongoDB and different other packages. So for that we will need to initialize the npm in our project. So npm init to start npm in our project. So pressing enter multiple times will do the job for us. So after that we will be getting the package.json. And for now, let's install the Express and NodeMon for speeding our development. So npm install Express and then npm install NodeMon. After the NodeMon is installed, you want to navigate to the package.json and add a new line in the script that says start, and it will command our Node.js to open our app.js from NodeMon. So save this file and we are ready to go. Now let's start by creating a server. So navigate into app.js and const express. We are requiring or importing the express over here, and then const express is require express, and our const app is the express app, right? And this time we will be listening app.listen to port 8000, right? And in the callback function we will be writing console.log server started successfully, right? And let's save this and start our server with npm start. So if everything is working fine, your server should be started.
Now if you navigate into the Postman, you can see that there are 5 API endpoints with different methods that does different thing in our backend. So now our task is to replicate these routes or these API endpoints. Now let's navigate to app.js and write our code over there. Now if I write everything in the app.js, then the code will be too much complex for me to maintain and to code itself, right? So instead of writing everything or every logic in app.js file, what we will do is we'll create a new folder named controllers. So new folder named controllers, and we'll be keeping our logic and functionality of each route inside of controllers. So now let's go ahead and create some route in our project. So let me comment this as routes. So the first route that will be adding to our app is add a movie route. If you look into the Postman, this add a movies route will be the first route that will be adding. So you might be asking, why add a movie route? Why not get all movies at first? Because to get all the movies, you should have some data in the database, right? Now we are trying to create a new database. When you will create a new database, there will be no movie data in the database. So to query the database and get all the movies, first we need to add some data in the database. So for that reason only, we will be adding the post request first in our app. So to accept the post request from the user, instead of doing app.get, we will be doing app.post. And if user lands to API/movies, as you can see in this Postman, if a user lands at, if you see the base URL, it's localhost 4000. In our case, it's localhost 8000. And if someone lands to localhost 8000/API/movies, in our case, it's localhost 8000 API/movies, then I want them to be able to receive some request or get their request and then provide some response, right? But instead of doing this, or instead of providing all the logic in this app.js file, what I want to do is I want to create a different JS file and then handle all the logic and functionalities from there. By doing so, what we will do is we will not be cluttering up our app.js file, and it will be easier for us to assess the functions in the future and also make our code more maintainable and more simpler or not too much complex, right? So instead of doing arrow functions over here, what you want to do is you want to go to the controller and then create a new file and rename that file as addmovie.js. Now inside of add movie, I want you to create a variable. So const add movie is a arrow function, dummy arrow function, and then we also want to export this. So module.exports, by exporting, what we are doing is we are making this file available for this another file to access, right? So if you export it, the function from here, you will be able to access that function over here. So this is exactly what we need. So module.export is what we will be exporting is add movie, right? And if you save this and if you go to the app.js, and in the second parameter we will be writing add movie. Now in some cases Visual Studio Code will automatically suggest you the import, but if it does not, you can move to the end of this word and press control space or command and space, and the Visual Studio Code will suggest you with that file. And if it does not, you should be importing this manually. So the way to import this manually is const add movie. So the same variable that is here, so it will be imported from require working directory controllers and then add movie.js, or js is also not required, right? So if you save this, you can see that now, so if some request is sent to API/movies, then the request will be handled by add movie. Now let's go ahead in our Postman and create another collection. So the reason for adding a new collection is because we do not want to get confused with this existing API endpoint. So go ahead and click at the plus icon and rename this new collection as movies API using database, or anything you want. Movies API using database. Now we will be adding the first request over here. So expand this and click at add a request, right? And in the request, our request will be of post method, and the URL will be http localhost 8000/API and then /movies, right? This is our route. So let's first start our server by npm start, and after the server is started, let's go into the Postman and send a post request.
Now if I send a post request on this route keep on loading and does not provide any response. The reason for it to not provide response is because we have not provided any response in our code, right? So let's go ahead and provide a response from our code. So to send a response from this add a movie.js, so if someone lands into this route using a post request, then they will be forwarded to this route, and from this route we will be trying to send a response to our client. So for sending the response, we will be needing the request and the response variable. So if you are using this app.post, app.get or anything from here, then the second parameter will be able to assess the request and the response, right? So now that we have request and response over here, we can send response dot status 200 is 200. Okay, this everything is working fine. And then the JSON, and inside of JSON we will be writing the status success. But for now, let me write this as this is add a movie route, for me to detect that everything is working fine. So by restarting, so the node mon has restarted our server. Now if I navigated into the Postman and send this request again, you can see that this is add a movie route. So everything seems to be working fine. So now that we have a post request which will create a movie, let's go ahead and integrate database into our system and then add a movie in real time. So I'll see you in the next lesson. So it's now time that we integrate a real database into our Node.js app. So we'll be using MongoDB as our database in this course. The reason for using MongoDB is that they are extremely fast, they are performant, they are reliable, and they are easy to scale. Now there are two ways to use MongoDB as our database. The first one is using MongoDB locally, in which you download the instance of MongoDB into your system and then use it from there. And the second way is to use MongoDB cloud storage, or MongoDB that is hosted in the cloud, which is also known as MongoDB Atlas. It is a service provided by the MongoDB for those users who want to host their database in the cloud. And we will also be using the MongoDB Atlas or cloud hosted MongoDB because it is too much hassle to install it locally. And by the way, you will still need an online hosted MongoDB instance if you are going into the production anyways, right? So why not start from now? So we will be registering our account, or we will be signing up for MongoDB Cloud, or also known as MongoDB Atlas. So create your free account to get started. So click at try free and then sign up using your email address. You can also use your Google account for easy sign up. So once your account is created, you can accept the privacy policy, you can read it if you want, and then click at submit. And then if you are prompted with any other questions, you can answer that. And in the deployment process, select AM0 free version for now, because we will be hosting it for free for now. And then the provider is AWS is completely fine. And then select one region. And then let's rename it as my DB data for now, or you can change the database name to anything you want. And when this wizard is shown to you, select username and password for authentication. And username will be our username for connecting the database. The password, you can select a password or auto generate a secure password and copy this password for using it later. So let's copy it and then paste it somewhere in your notepad, your notes, or somewhere, so that we can assess this again. And then click at create a user. After creating the user, we are ready to move into the next process. And where would you like to connect from? So we would like to be connected from our local environment from now, not from the cloud. And then in the IP address, write 0.0.0.0/0 is globally accessible. When you go into the production, you can change this. But for now, you add this accessible from any part of this world. And click at add an entry and then finish and close for now. So once you have done that, you will be presented with the dashboard of our database. Now our first task will be to connect to our database. So click at connect, and if you have prompted with this, click at drivers, and then you need to copy this connection string. So go ahead and copy this connection string, and let's modify this a little bit. Now this time we will be using the password that we had saved previously to replace this connection string. So copy it and then paste it, and then take the password that you have saved somewhere in your file and then replace this password placeholder with your password. Now this will be our connection string for connecting to our MongoDB database from our local device, also from the production and also from the Node.js app. Now securely store this connection string for using it later. Now click it close, and then we are done. Now if you want to see the data that are collected in your database, click at browse collections, and then you will be able to see the data that have been stored in your database. Now there are two ways to view the data that is stored in your database. One is to use this online portal or go into the MongoDB Atlas and use this dashboard to view the data in the collections tab. The another way to view our data is using the MongoDB Compass app. It is a native software that we can use in our system. It is a convenient way to view the data. So we'll also be installing MongoDB Compass for viewing our data on the database. So let's go ahead and install MongoDB Compass as well, because every time logging into the MongoDB Atlas and seeing it from the browser is not a very good way to access our database, right? So let's go ahead and install MongoDB Compass. Now search for the MongoDB Compass and then download the MongoDB Compass on your device. So once the MongoDB Atlas is installed on your system, this will be the user interface that you will be seeing. And from the new connection, you want to copy the previous connection string that you have built, the connection string to connect the MongoDB, copy it and paste it over here, right? And then click at save and connect. We also want to connect, and then also we want to save this connection for using this later. So click at save and connect, and then it wants the name for saving this. So for now we'll be writing testing database, right? And then select the color of your choice and then save and connect. So this will try to make a connection to your MongoDB. So once the connection is done, you will be presented with your database. Now you don't need to go into your website or MongoDB Atlas website and log in to see your data from there. This is a convenient way to access your cloud stored MongoDB database. Now if you go into the database, you can see two databases. Do not delete that. These are automatically created by the MongoDB. And now we will be creating the database from our Node.js app. So in this next lesson, we will be learning how we can connect our Node.js app with the MongoDB Atlas that is hosted in the cloud. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So now that we are able to connect to our MongoDB cloud from MongoDB Compass, it's time for us to add MongoDB on our Node.js app so as to save, retrieve and perform other necessary operations. So for making a connection to the MongoDB from our Node.js app, we will be needing a package from npm. Now there are two packages available for making a connection to MongoDB. The two packages are Mongoose and MongoDB. Now MongoDB is a Node.js driver. It is an official MongoDB driver for Node.js, but I personally prefer Mongoose. Now Mongoose uses MongoDB under the hood, but it also provides many features that MongoDB does not provide, like creation of schema, models and different other data modeling things. It will be easier for us to use Mongoose, and many developers, millions of developers use Mongoose while they are working on the MongoDB database from Node.js. So we will also be using Mongoose. We will not be using MongoDB. Although you can use MongoDB and you can research on it, but throughout this course you will be using Mongoose and performs operations from Mongoose. So let's go ahead and install Mongoose in our system. So if you have any starter server, close it for now, and then npm install Mongoose. Once the Mongoose is installed on your system, you can go ahead and import the Mongoose. So const Mongoose equals to require Mongoose. Now what you need to do is you need to make a connection. So I'll comment it connection to MongoDB. Now the way to make a connection using the Mongoose to MongoDB is mongoose.connect, and the first parameter will be the URI or the connection string that we had saved previously in our MongoDB Compass. So bring that over from the MongoDB Compass or any place that you have saved it previously and paste it in the first parameter. And in the second parameter, we do not want anything, so pass an empty brackets. And then if the connection is successful, we'll be getting an console.log connection to Mongo successful, MongoDB successful. And then if error, we'll be throwing an error like console.log connection to MongoDB failed, right? Now after saving this, if you restart the server, you can see that server started successfully and then the connection to MongoDB was also successful. In this way, you can connect to your MongoDB database using Mongoose. Now in our code, we have exposed our database string or our connection string to our database. It is not a very good way to expose critical information like this or hard code critical information like this in our code. So in our next lesson, we will be learning how we can secure the sensitive data on our Node.js app using the environment variables. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will be learning about the environment variables. Environment variables are a way for us to securely store the sensitive data. Instead of writing this in a plain code and hard coding it in our program, we'll be storing this type of sensitive data, like sensitive data may be connection to our database, API keys, API secret code and stuffs like that. This type of sensitive data will be stored in our environment file or .env file as you call it, instead of hard coding in our code itself. So let's go ahead and store this connection string in our environment or environment file or .env file instead of hard coding it over here. So for that, create a new file and rename it as .env, meaning an environment variables. So in environment file is nothing but a combination of key and value pair. So let me create a key and value pair for our Mongo connection string. So for that, I'll be writing Mongo underscore connection, right? This will be our key for the connection, and then the value will be, let me cut this and paste it over here. So we have taken out the sensitive data or the connection string to the database from our app.js hard coded file, and then we have kept it on our environment variable or .env file. Now it's time for the app.js file to access the environment variable. For that, we will be needing a package called .env. So if your server is running, close that server for now, and then npm install .env. So once it is installed, we need to require or import that .env. So for that, after the express, write const or simply require .env and then env and then initialize the config function. So save your code, and after the code is saved, you will be able to access the environment variable key and value pair. And the way to access this is, now the previously where we had a string for MongoDB connection, we can access the Mongo connection string from our env file by using process.env dot and then the connection string key. So Mongo underscore connection. So let's save this and let's start our server. Npm run start or npm start. So the connection to MongoDB is successful, meaning that our .env file is working as expected. Now even if I push this code in a repository, I will not be pushing the .env file into my repository. So in this way, my connection string to database will be secured. Now if anyone want to replicate this code or use this code for their own purpose, they will be needing to create an .env file on their own, and then they need to provide Mongo connection and their own connection string to database. Now if I want anyone of my team or any developer to have access to my database, I will share this .env file secretly to them. I will not be pushing this file in the repository. So everything or every code I write inside the env file will be secured, and only my team members, my developers or me individually can access those key and value pairs. So now that we have learned how we can securely store data on environment variable instead of hard coding it, it's time for us to make a progress in our course. So let's move to the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be learning about models and schema, and to make you better understand how models and schema work, I've created a Google Sheet for you, which will act as a dummy database for understanding the basic concept of models and schema. So this models and schema thing is brought by Mongoose, and it is not a feature of MongoDB. This model and schema of Mongoose will help us structure our data
and then model our data in an easier way and then validate our data. So the primary reason for us using the Mongoose instead of MongoDB code driver was for utilizing the models and schema that Mongoose provides to us. So let's try to understand what models and schemas are and how a typical database works. So using this Google Sheet, we'll try to understand what models and schema actually are. So let's suppose this to be a database of an school. A database of an school can hold different records like records of students, right? Record of books and different other things. So if you look into the student table, you can see that there are certain keys that will have a property of a certain student, right? So if you go into the books, you can see that there is a certain book, and then these are the keys that represent, or these are the properties of that book. So every collection or every table has a key properties or the headers inside of them. So in Mongoose, the collection is said to be an model. So this is an student model. This is an books model. And the keys you see over here inside of the model are the schemas. Schema will define what type of data is allowed in this column. For instance, in A's, I will not be able to write ABC if it was for Mongoose because it will not allow strings where the numbers are only accepted.
So to make you better understand, I have replicated the database system of MoviesDB dummy API that we tested in our previous lessons. So if you look into the Postman and the response of the get all movies in our MoviesDB dummy API, by the way, you do not need to start the server and see the response, just see here. You can see that in the data of movies, there is an object, movie object, and inside the movie object, there are some key and value pair. And in every movie object, you will see similar kind of key and value pair. The keys are ID, movie name, info, and rating. Now, if I have to present this visually, this is what it looks like. So if you look into the movies DB, the movies database or movies DB is the complete database system. The movies list is the collection of movies, which can also be said as the movies list model in our Mongoose term. And the headers you see over here, which will hold the value of the movie, are the schemas, right? And this is the movie data. So in our next lesson, we'll be trying to create the movies list model and then the schema inside of it. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So now that we have a basic understanding of what models and schemas are, let's create one for our movies API. So now instead of writing the model code in our app.js file, our goal is to minimize app.js code as much as possible because it will be easier for us to maintain and to read our own codes, right? So instead of writing the model codes here, let's create a new folder, name it as models, and all of our models will be inside this folder. Now inside of models, let's create a file and name it as movies.model.js. Now reason for using this model in our JS file is because it will be easier for us to search for models. Now in Visual Studio Code, you can search for the file directly by pressing Command and P. Now if I type model here, I can see all the models related files over here. So it will be easier for me to navigate. So I am naming it as movies.model.js instead of just movies.js. Now inside of this file, let's create a model. For that, we need to import Mongoose in this file. So const Mongoose is require Mongoose, right? Now after this, we'll be creating a model over here. So the code for creating a model is const movies model equals to Mongoose dot model, and the first parameter will be the name of that model. So in case of naming this model, I generally use lowercase to avoid the case sensitive issues in the future. So I also recommend you use the lowercase while creating the model. So we'll name the model as movies, and then in our second parameter we will have an schema of the movie. So let's write it as movies schema, and now we should be creating this movies schema. So const movies schema equals new mongoose dot schema. So inside of this schema object, we will be creating these headers, right? So we do not need to create this ID header because it is automatically generated by Mongoose. In most of the databases, this ID is a unique field that is automatically created by the database. So we do not need to create this, and we will start by creating a movie name. So inside of it, you need to write movie name, underscore name, and the properties will be inside of this curly braces. So the type of movie name is the string. As you can see, the movie name is of type string. Now the second field that we need to add is the info field. So let's go ahead and create an info field, comma, and then info. Info is also of type string, and then one last remaining is the rating, and the rating is of type number, right? Now by doing so, you can save this file, and for this file to be accessed in other part of our code, we need to export it. So module.exports, and then movies model, and by exporting this model, we will be able to use this model in our other files as well. Now before importing it and using our model, let's have a look at our MongoDB compass where we had connected to our testing database previously. So if you navigated into the database tab, you can see that there are these predefined databases, and there is no database of our own. So we need to first create a database. And while using Mongoose, we will not be creating database from here. Instead, we will be creating the database using our own code. So for creating the database using our code, navigate into .env file where we had saved the connection string previously, and before this query parameters, type your database name over here. So let my database name be moviesdb, and save this file. Now if your server is already started, close the server and start the server again. But if your server is not started, you can go ahead and start the server. Now after the connection is successful to MongoDB, you can have a look at your MongoDB compass and refresh it, but you will still not see the database over here. The reason is because we have not initialized any models or collection inside of it. So if you do not have any collection inside the database, the MongoDB compass will not be able to display your database. So let's initialize our movies model. So for initializing the movie model, go into your app.js file, and right after the MongoDB connection or anywhere below this MongoDB connection, type or import this movies model over here. So require, and then working directory models, and then movies.model.js or movies.model. So after making the change, save this, and after the server is restarted and MongoDB connected successfully, you navigate into MongoDB compass and refresh. So now you can see that your database is created named moviesdb. So this moviesdb is created by the name that we used over here, and inside of our database there will be a movies model, and the name that we have selected over here is the name that we have created in this. Now this movies, in terms of Mongoose, it is a model, but in terms of MongoDB and MongoDB compass, it is a collection. So models and collections can be said as the same thing and can be used interchangeably. Now if you navigate inside of these movies, there is no data available because we have not added any. Now it's time for us to work on our add movie route. So I'll see you at the next lesson where we will be adding a movie data in our database. So I'll see you there. Now after creating models and schema and then initializing it, we are now ready to work on our add movie route. But before that, let me comment models over here so that it will be easier for us to read, and then the model will be inside of this comment, and then the routes will be inside of this comments, making it easier for us to read. Now let's work on add movie route. Now easier way to navigate to add movie route or any file that have been imported, you can simply press ctrl and then click over here to land in this file. So if you see in this route, we can see that there is a code which returns this is an add a movie route in JSON format. So let's go in our Postman and send this request again. Right, also rename this request as add a movie. So let's go ahead and send a payload data to our server. For that, navigate into the body, raw, and then we'll be sending this JSON file. So write your JSON over here. Now for now we'll only be sending movie underscore name, right? And then movie name is the best offer. And let's see if our server can read the request that is being sent from here. Now if I click at send, it's still responding with this is an add movie route. So let's change that. Let's read the user request. Now in this code we are not reading the user request, and every user request will be available in this request parameter. So let's go ahead and console that. So console.log and then the request parameter, we will be seeing all the requests that our clients are sending. So after this, after the server is started, navigate into the Postman and send the request again. Now you can still see this is an add movie route because this is the response we are sending. But if you navigate into the VS Code, in the console, you can see that we are currently reading the request that is being sent from our client. So there are a lot of request data over here and most of them are irrelevant to us. The only thing relevant to us for now is if you navigate into the Postman, we have sent a request from body. So we will be able to access this JSON if we could console.log the request body. So after making the changes from request to request.body, we will be able to access the request body of our request. So once the server has started, go into your Postman and send the request again. Now if you see your console, you can see that we are getting an undefined data. This is because Express by default does not accept the JSON data. So for us to be able to access the JSON data, navigate into app.js, and right after where the app, we have declared app as an Express app, you must write app.use and then express.json. By doing so, we are instructing the Express to accept the JSON payloads as well. So after that, after the server is restarted successfully, go into your Postman and send the request again. So you will be able to see the movie name and the key and value pair as in JSON. So you can see that we have received movie name and the movie value over here. So this is how you work with user request. So now that we are able to access the data that is being sent by the client, it's now time to take that data and insert into our database. Now if you look into the previous request that we have saved in the Postman of movies dummy API, in the add movie route, you can see that we have sent three variables on this. The movie name, info and rating. So let's copy these variables and paste it in our new API. So instead of typing each and every code, we are just pasting it over here. So this time we are sending movie name, info and rating. So let's send that and see what data will be retrieving in our console. So you can see that we have retrieved every data that was sent from the payload. Now instead of reading all the data and validating all the data, we will only be validating data that will be relevant to us. For instance, from Postman payload, if I send the data that is not relevant to us, let's say the description. For now, we will not be needing a description, right? So let the description be XYZ. And then if I send this, you can see that we have also got the data of description, but we only need these three variables. So how can we accept and validate only the required variables is we need to use the destructuring method. So const starting the curly braces, we can destructure the object that is being received as a payload. So we'll be needing movie underscore name comma info and rating from request.body. So what this destructuring did is it created three variables named movie name, info and rating, and then assigned the value of this payload into their respective variables. So if we send in this status, we are only sending this is an add movie route. Instead we can send movie underscore name, let it be movie underscore name for now, and info will be sending the info, and then in the rating we will be sending the rating. So let's save that and see the response in our Postman. So if I click at send, we can see that we are able to read the payload data from our response. So everything is working fine and our destructuring is also working. By destructuring, we are removing any variable that is not relevant to us. Or instead of removing, you can say that we are ignoring the variables that are not relevant to us or to our code. So now that we have three variables that are relevant to us, let's write some validation code. So let's remove the console.log for now. And let's remove this as well from our response. And in the status, we will be writing success because this is successful. If nothing happens, no error occurs, then it is successful. And in message, we'll be writing movie added successfully.
So the reason for us to write movie edit successfully at the end of this code is because all the validations will be checked above this code. Let me write validations over here. So we will check all the validations in this part of the code, and if everything is okay and there is no error in the request or in creating process, then only the client will be able to see this response. And if any error occurs in the validation process or while saving the data to the database, we will send another response and we will be returning our code so that client does not reach at this part of the code. So we can say that this part of the code is a success part of our code. So in throughout of this course we'll be writing our success message at the end, so that if everything goes right, then the client will be able to see the success message, and if anything goes wrong, we will handle the error here and send the respective error message accordingly. So in the next lesson, we will learn about the validations and how we can validate the incoming request of our clients. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be learning about validations of our client request. It is not necessary that client request is always valid. Sometimes we need to perform some validations. For instance, if the client does not provide the movie name, then we cannot add an empty movie into our database. So validation is needed. So let's write some validations. So in validation section, what we will write is, if the client does not provide movie name, if movie name is undefined or there is no movie name in the payload, then what we will do is we will be sending a error status code. So response.status, if everything is okay, we will be sending 200 status code, and if something is not fine, we will be sending 400 status code. 400 status code means bad request. To learn more about the status code, you can search for HTTP status code in your search engine and you can have a look at the status codes. So if you search for HTTP status code and click on the first link, then you can see that there are different status code, and one relevant to us is 200 OK, which is if everything is fine, then we can send 200 OK, and if something is wrong, we can send other error status code, but for now we will be sending 400 bad request. You can have a look at different status code and send the relevant status code accordingly. But for now we will be sending response.status 400, and in JSON we will be sending status failed, and the message for the failure is movie name must be provided. So if the request does not have movie name on it, then we will be sending the response of 400 bad request, and the message will be movie name is not provided or must be provided. So if the request does not have movie name, then the validation fails, and instead of providing the response of movie edited successfully, we will be providing the response of 400 status code, and we will say movie name must be provided. Now what we need to do is we need to return this block of code. By returning this block of code, we are making sure that after this response, the code will not go any further into this line. Now if you do not return this block of the code, let me remove this for now and let me restart the server and show you the issue if you do not return the code. So let's start our server. Now in Postman, if I send the request without the movie name, then you can see that a movie name must be provided and the request has failed. Everything is working fine, but if you see at the console, our app has crashed. Our app has crashed because there is an error. An error says that HTTP headers already sent. So in Express or in any other HTTP platform, we cannot send response twice. So by removing the return from our code block, what we are doing is we are sending this response of error, and then again we are trying to send this response, which is not a valid thing, because once the response is already sent to the client side, we cannot send another response, or we cannot send multiple response at once. So what we need to do is we need to return this block of code so that another status code or another response does not get triggered, and the client will not be able to reach this part of the code and they will return from here itself. So after the server has restarted, let's go in the Postman and send the request again, and you can see movie name must be provided, and if you see at the console, our app has not crashed.
In this way we can validate the request of our client. For now we are checking for movie name. Let's check for the info and rating as well. Now if the client does not, if the payload does not have info in it, then we will be saying info must be provided. And if the client does not have rating on it, then we will be writing rating must be provided, right? Now if we save this and if we look into our Postman and send a request over here without the movie name, we can see that movie name must be provided. Now let's write movie name over here, the best offer. And then if I try to send a response, send a request, it says movie added successfully because validation, all the validations are working successfully. There is no errors. And if I try to remove this info, key and value pair from here, and if I try to send the response, send the request, it says that info must be provided. So all our validations are working fine. Now if I try to send the request in which the JSON is not formatted in a correct way, you can see that there is a red mark, meaning that the JSON is not correct because we are not providing comma over here, and in Postman there is a strict checking of JSON. So if I do not provide comma, then the Express will throw error. It says that the JSON is not formatted or unexpected string at JSON and some error related to JSON. So make sure while sending the payload, you make sure that the JSON is correct and there is no red marking over in the JSON payload data. So if you send this, you can see that movie added successfully because everything is working fine. You can also check other validations over here, like in the rating, rating must be between 0 to 100. Then what you can do is you can again copy this block of code and then write if rating thing is less than 1 and or rating is more than 10, then what we need to throw our response error is rating must be between 1 to 10. So now if user tries to manipulate the request, or if user want to send the request in which the rating is 100, then they will get the error of rating must be between 1 to 100. So in this way, what you can do is you can validate the user request, and only if the validation is successful, then the user will be able to see movie added successfully. Now if you see at this code, it is a very long code and it is not a good approach to repeat our code every time. So in the next lesson, we will see how we can handle the code, this type of validation code effectively using a try-catch block. So I'll see you there. So if you look into our code carefully, you can see that we have repeated same line of code for multiple times. Only difference between them is the message, right? So it goes against our philosophy of DRY, don't repeat yourself. So instead of writing and repeating same code over and over, we should find a way in which we can minimize our code and handle the error from one block of code for everything. So we can use try-catch block for effectively handling the errors. So let's see how it's done. Now instead of providing an error response in this way and returning every time in each block of code, what we will do is we will trigger an exception using a throw statement. A throw in JavaScript is a statement which will trigger an error or an exception. So not having a movie data in the payload is an error. So what we can do is we can throw an exception using a throw statement. So we can write here movie name is required. So what we are doing over here is we are throwing an exception or an error that says a movie name is required. Now if we use a throw statement, then the code below it will not execute. The function will exit from here itself. So we do not have to use return statement as well. So let's save this code and try to send a request from our Postman. Now if I send a request from Postman by doing everything right, and if I send the request, then the rating must be between 10. We should make this rating 9 for now. And then if everything is okay, movie added successfully. But if we remove the movie name, then the exceptions will be triggered. So if I click at send, then there is an exception. But this exception is not handled well. This exception is handled by Express. Now most of the time, Express handles the expression so that our server will not crash. But in
rare scenarios our server might crash if we do not handle this throw statement. So a way to handle a throw statement is to wrap this throw block or the throw statement by try catch block. So by using the try catch block, what we can do is if any error occurs inside of this try block, the error will be passed down to this catch block, and in the catch block we can gracefully handle the error. So try catch block will help us gracefully handle the JavaScript error and other errors as well. So what we can do is we can cut this code and we can paste it inside the try block. So if error is thrown from here, then this catch will catch all the exceptions, and inside of this catch block what we can do is we can gracefully handle the error. Now to gracefully handle the error, what we can do is we can copy this block of code and then paste it over here. So if any error occurs inside of this try block, the exception will be thrown and caught by this catch block, and this exception, the e variable over here, will hold the message that is written in the throw. So we will replace this info must be provided by e or the exception. So let's save this. So let's go to our Postman and then send this same request. So you can see that the request is failed and the movie name is required. Response is now thrown by gracefully handling exception that was triggered from here. Now what we can do is instead of writing in these two lines, what we can do is we can remove the curly braces and write this throw in the same line. Now instead of throwing this response error message every time and returning every time, what we can do is we can check all these exceptions inside of this try catch block. So instead of doing this, what we can do is if info is not provided, then we can throw the exception of info must be provided. Now let's do for another one as well, and if rating is not provided, we can throw the exception of rating is not provided, right? And in the next exception where rating must be between 1 to 10, let's copy this, and inside of this what we can do is we can throw an exception, rating must be between 1 to 10. Now we can remove all of this code, and all of this code is now handled by a single try catch block, which will accept the exception. We will get an exception that is thrown inside of the try block and gracefully handle and return the response of failed status. So using the try catch block will help us minimize the code that needs to be done for handling the errors and exceptions, and will make our code more readable and more reliable. So I'll see you in the next lesson where we will be learning more and diving deeper into the code of Node.js. So I'll see you there. Now, before we interact with the database or perform operations inside of database, we need to first understand what code execution methods are. What is asynchronous and synchronous method of code execution? What are promises and what are async and await statements? So let's get started. There are two types of code execution methods: synchronous code execution and asynchronous code execution. So JavaScript uses asynchronous way of executing the code. So let's try to understand what synchronous and asynchronous are with an example. Now this is a very basic code of JavaScript. At the first block of code, we are assigning the values to the variable, and in second part of the code, we are adding those variables and storing the results in a results variable, and in the third part of code, we are logging in the results so as to see the addition of these two variables. Now in this block of code, there is no any code that might delay the execution process of this code block. So everything will execute instantly in this scenario. And synchronous and asynchronous code will handle this code execution in a similar way because there is nothing to block this code execution. Now let's have a look at a block of code in which the code execution might delay. So in this code you can see there is a function called getData, and inside of it there are three code blocks. The first block of code is only logging in the hello world. However, the second code block is getting something from the internet. Now this second block of code is trying to send a request to the internet or external API, and then it is trying to store the response results in the variable called results. Now if you have a look at the third block of code, it is trying to display the results that was brought from the internet by code 2. So it is not always necessary that this code 2 will bring the results from the internet instantly. There may be some delay in the execution process, right? The delay might be because of slow internet connection, or there may be an issue with an external API, or due to other factors. So let's see the asynchronous and synchronous way of executing this code. In synchronous method of code execution, every block of code runs in sync. If we try to execute this block of code in synchronous way, let's see what happens. At first, the hello world will be logged. And when the code reaches here, the code will try to get an API response from the external API or try to communicate with the database for doing some operations. And without this code being completed, the code 3 will not start. It will wait for the code 2 to complete or to throw an error, and after the code 2 has failed or succeeded, then only code 3 will run, because every code is running in sync. The asynchronous code execution is different from the synchronous code execution. In asynchronous code, there is no blocking code. None of the code will wait for another code to execute or to throw the response or error. In this case, if you try to execute the same block of code in an asynchronous way, what happens is at first the hello log will be logged, and then this code will run. The code will be trying to get the response from the internet, and while the code 2 is trying to get the data from the internet or data from the database, code 3 will be executed at the same time. So in this asynchronous code execution, none of the code wait for another code to execute or to perform successfully or throw an error. There is no blocking in the code, and JavaScript code is an asynchronous code. So using a non-blocking architecture, asynchronous code is super fast because none of the code will block the execution of another code. But in some cases, it can be a problem. So let's see how. So if I try to execute this block of code in JavaScript, I will not be getting the desirable results. This is because code 3 will not wait for code 2 to complete, because code are executed in an asynchronous way in JavaScript and it does not wait for any delays in the code. Now, if you try to run this same block of code in a synchronous way, you will be getting the desirable results, because in synchronous way, this code 3 will wait for code 2 to execute. Code 3 will wait for the execution of code 2 and only execute when the response is provided from code 2 or there is an error in the code 2 execution. And this is what we expect from our code. Without waiting for code 2, if the code 3 is executed, we will not be getting the desirable results or we will not be getting the response data from the internet or the database. So in this type of scenario, synchronous code execution wins over asynchronous code execution. So if we try to get the desirable response in this console using an asynchronous method, we need to use a promise or async and await. Using promise or async and await, we can wait for the code execution same as in the synchronous code execution method and get the desirable results. And by introducing async and await into our JavaScript code, we can execute certain parts of our code in a synchronous way. So you can say that async await is a way for us to convert the asynchronous code execution type to an synchronous code execution, but only at certain parts of our code, so that our other parts of the code are performant and working on a non-blocking architecture, and where we need the synchronous code execution type, we can achieve that using async and await. So let's see how it's done. So now we'll try to execute this code in a synchronous way but in JavaScript. So for doing that, what we need to do is we need to use async await in our function. So if you want to wait for the code execution or delayed execution, then you need to create an asynchronous function, or you need to convert your function into an asynchronous function. And by using the asynchronous function instead of regular function, you will be able to access the await statement. This await statement will make sure that without completion of this code block where the await is used, the code block below it will not execute. And this whole method is called promise because code 3 promises to code 2 that it will wait for the execution. So the name promise. And it was important for us to understand async and await before proceeding into our course, because database connection or operating data or accessing the data from the database will also make some execution delays. So to handle that, we will be needing an asynchronous function, and inside of it we will write our await statement and then perform the database operations.
So I'll see you at the next lesson where we will be trying to add data to the database and we'll create our first data in the database. So I'll see you there.
So now that we have an idea of what promises are, what async and await are, and how they work, we are ready to create our first record in the database. Now it was important for us to understand the concept of async and await before we could interact with the database, because while interacting with the database, there is some code execution delay. So now that we have an idea of how execution delay can be handled in our code, we are ready to interact with the database and create our first record. So we will be using the add movie route to add a movie to our database. So start up your Postman, start up your MongoDB Compass, and let's start writing some codes. So let me start the server first. So after the server has started, navigate into add movie route, and from this route we will be adding a movie data into our database. So if I need to interact with database from this file, I need to first import Mongoose into our code. So const Mongoose is require Mongoose. Now to add a data to our movies model, we will be needing to import the movies model as well. But as we have already initialized our movies model in the app.js file, we do not need to import movies model every time into our code. Instead, what we can do is we can create a variable over here. So const movies is the Mongoose model of movies. So you need to make sure that the model name that you have written here should match with the actual model name. So now inside of add movie.js, we have an SS2 movies model. Now we can use this to create a record in this model. So to avoid confusion, let's rename this movies as movies model, which is of course the movies Mongoose model of movies. So we'll use this variable and then create a record in that model. So right above the movie added successfully, we'll be writing movies model dot create. Create is a function that will help us add data or add new record to that model. So the data we will be sending for writing into our database are the data that we have received from the request movie name, info, and rating. So we'll be sending movie underscore name, which is the movie name that we have got from requested body, and the info is the info that we have got from requested body as well, and the rating. Now from our previous lesson, what we have learned is if we are trying to interact with the database, the interaction can have some delay in the execution. So to handle the delay in the execution, what we need to do is we need to use the await statement. And for us to use the await statement, the function that we are using await statement should be an asynchronous function. So let's add async over here. Now by using async, we will be able to use the await statement. Now by doing this, what we are assuring is without executing this function or without getting the response from this function, this response will not be returned. So let's go ahead in the Postman and try to send the request of creating a movie. So everything is fine in our payload, and let's click at send. Now after the movie is added successfully, you can navigate into your MongoDB Compass, and then if you click at refresh or find, you can see that the new record is created in our database in our movies model. So congratulations for creating the first data in your database. Now if you want to see the recently created data from this code, what you can do is you can assign a variable to this function. So const created movie is the movies model.create function. Now this function will return the recent data that is created in that model. So created, let's console and see this created movie data. So console.log created movie. Now let's send this request from Postman and we will be able to see the created movie data in our console. So navigate into the Postman, payload seems fine, click at send. And in console, you can see that the recently created movie is being displayed in our console. Now, if you refresh your MongoDB Compass, you can see that there are two records created. Now, movie name, info, and rating are the variable that we sent while creating this record. And this ID variable is auto created by the database. And it is always unique throughout this movies model. Now, if you want to manipulate data in your MongoDB Compass, you can click at this edit button and then you can make changes directly from here, right? and it says document is modified, and if you click at update, the database data record is updated directly in the MongoDB Compass or directly in our database. Also, you can use this delete icon to delete this record. For now, there are two the best offer movies, so let's delete one. Now there is one very important thing that you need to understand while working with async await statements. That is, you need to always wrap your await statement with try catch block. The reason we do this is because this statement of creating the data or any statement that has an await in it might throw some error or throw some exceptions. The exception may be triggered due to the connection error or the creation validation error or by many different factors. But if we do not handle those errors in an effective way or in a graceful way, our server might crash. So to prevent that, what we need to do is we need to wrap await statement with try catch block and then handle the error gracefully. So let's wrap our code, this creation code, with try catch block as well. So try to perform this creation code, and if something goes wrong, we'll be handling the exception inside of this catch block. So inside of this catch block, I'll be copying this error validation error code and then I'll paste it over here. And instead of throwing this exception from here, what I want to do is I want to return a static message that says our validation error will already provide the customized message, but if the error is in our Mongoose or if the error is in the creation process, what I want to write is movie creation failed. Something went wrong. Now by doing this, we are gracefully handling the error and preventing our server from crashing. Now let's try adding some movies from our Postman. So the movie I'll be adding this time is the Hangover movie. I've modified the response for the Hangover movie and let me send the request. If I click at send, our server has crashed. But if you see into our MongoDB Compass and refresh the page, you can see that the Hangover movie has been created, but our server is crashed. So let's debug why the server has crashed. So the server has said that created movie is not defined. So another thing that you need to keep in mind while using the try catch block is if you are initializing any variable inside of the try block, this variable will not be accessible outside of the try catch block. So what you need to do is you need to cut this code and paste it inside of the try block. Now our code will run successfully without throwing any errors. So let me add one more movie into our database. So this time I'll be sending the payload of perfume movie. So let's send this and see the response. So movie added successfully. Now if I navigate into the MongoDB Compass and refresh the page, I can see that the perfume has been added and our server is also working fine, and our server this time has responded with the newly created movie. In this lesson, we'll be learning about the schema validations. It is important for us to learn about the schema validations because it affects the way we create and update our data in the database. So I want you to navigate into the add movie route. Now as you can see, we are taking three request variables from the payload, right? The movie name, info and rating, right? And if you look into the Postman, we have been sending this description value from a very long time while we are creating a data in the database. But this description value is not being displayed in our records. The primary reason for it is we are ignoring the description from our payload, and we are also not providing the description key value pair while creating and record in the database. So it is obvious that it will not be displayed, but let's go ahead and provide a description in our data as well. So I'll be writing a description, and now that I have access of description, I'll be sending that in our create object. So description is the description. Let me save this, and we'll be sending a request from Postman to see if we can create a new movie data with the description field. So let's go ahead in the Postman and let me modify this request. I've written stored little over here, and now I'm making sure that there is a description key and value pair over here, and I'm clicking at send request. As you can see, movie is added successfully. Now if I refresh my MongoDB Compass, you can see that a movie is created with the name Stuart Little, information, rating, but there is no description.
And the reason for missing description is that this description field is not available in the movies model schema. Now we are pretty sure that we have sent a description in the create object, but due to the missing schema object or missing schema definition of the description is not added to our database. Now if you want the description to be displayed, you need to create that object in your schema. So description, and the description type is the string, right? Now let's save this model and send the request over again. So navigate into the Postman, and with the same payload, let's send a request. So movie is added successfully. Now if I refresh this page and if you navigate down, you can see that there is a description. Now this is rule number 1 of schema validation, or how the schema in Mongoose work. If you do not define the field in the schema, then that field will be ignored entirely. Now that was the first rule. The second rule of the schema of Mongoose is that if I remove any object or any field from our schema, it will not affect the database or the data that is already stored in our database. And this change in the schema will only affect the new data that will be created after the schema has been changed. Now using this updated schema, let's send a request from Postman using the same payload. If I click at send, you can see that the movie is added successfully. If I refresh our database, you can see that at the end, the rating field is missing. This is because the newly created data has respected the updated schema. Now there is an advantage to it. If you accidentally remove or accidentally rename the field in the schema, it will not affect the existing data. Now imagine this, that you have hundreds and thousands or millions of data in your movies model. Now if you accidentally remove an schema field or accidentally rename the schema field, and if it updated the data or removed that field from our database, then it will be a problem, right? But in Mongoose it is not the case. The updated schema will not affect the previous record. It will only affect the upcoming data. Now these are the things that you need to understand while working with Mongoose. Now the other thing that you need to understand is we can apply validation inside of the model itself. For instance, if you want this movie name to be a required field while creating a data in the movies model, what you can do is you can simply write required true. And by doing this, we are directly validating our data from the schema itself. Now if I try to send data to the server without the movie name, the result I'll be getting is movie name is required. Now this exception is thrown by our general validation that we have written here. Let's comment this out as well. So we are not validating that the movie name should be a required field, but instead we are writing this validation in the model itself. Now let's try sending the request again. So if I click at send, you can see that the movie creation failed, something went wrong. Now this exception is triggered by Mongoose itself from this part of the code. We have already removed the general validation from here, but the validation is now done by the model. And when we are trying to create a data without the movie name, the validation of the schema is failing. Thus, Mongoose is throwing an exception, and we are catching that exception and handling it in a graceful way. Now, to see an error message, a detailed error message, what you can do is you can remove this message from here and type e.message. Now save this and try to send the request again from the Postman. So you can see that a little bit of formatted message is shown, but it shows the actual error. It says that path movie name is required. Now if you want a custom message to be displayed here, what you can do is you can navigate into your schema, and then instead of writing required true, you need to create an array, and the first parameter will be the true, or first data will be the true, and the second data of an array will be the error that needs to be thrown while the validation fails. So movie name is required. So if I save this and if I restart the server and send the request again, you can see that there is an error, movie name is required. And this is how schema validation works. Now there are other validations as well. We will be learning that in the upcoming part of this course. So now that we have understood how schema validation work and how we can create and data in the database, and we do have enough data in the database, we can proceed to creating another route of getting the movies. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will be learning how we can retrieve the data from database. For this, we will be working on two routes, get all movies and get single movie. So let's go ahead and create those routes. Our first route will be the get all movies. So get all movies.js, and our another route will be get single movie.js. So let's work with get all movies first. So in get all movies, let's create a function. So const get all movies equals to an arrow function, and module.exports equals to get all movies. Now after saving this file, let's navigate to app.js and create a new route here. So if anyone sends a get request to localhost 8000/API/movies, then this route or this request will be handled by get all movies. Now if it is not automatically imported by VS Code, then you should import it manually. So after saving this, let's navigate to the Postman and create a new request for getting movies. So let's duplicate this and then rename it to get all movies. Change the request method from post to get, and our API will be the same for get request, but the only difference is we will be using the get method. So in get method there will be no body, so let's remove this body as well and then send the request. Now Postman keeps on sending the request because there is no returning of the response from our code. So let's fix that. Let's navigate inside the get all movies and we'll be able to asset the request and response parameters. So we'll send a dummy response for now. So response.status is 200, okay, and then JSON, and inside of JSON we'll be writing status hello from get all movies. So let's save this and let's see the response from Postman. So send the request again. And we can see that there is hello from all movies. So let's write our code for retrieving the data from database in this part of the code. So for doing that or for interacting with the database, we need to import Mongoose first. So const Mongoose is require Mongoose. After that, we need to bring in the movies model as well. So const movies model is the Mongoose model of movies, and make sure that movies model variable is inside of this get all movies. So to get data from the model, what we need to do is we need to execute the find function. So movies model dot find, and inside of this find there will be an object in which we can write the conditions for getting a specific data, but in our case we are trying to get all the data from that model, so we'll leave it as it is. And let's create a variable and assign the results of this function to an variable. So const movies data is the movies model.find. Now as we are interacting with the database, this will be an await statement, and for using the await, our function should be an async function. And now we can access the movies data, and this movies data variable will now store the value of all the data from this model. So let's copy this and let's send this over to our response. Right, now let's save this and see the response from our Postman. Now if I send a request to the server, I can see the list of all the movies in an array that we have retrieved from the movies model. So in this way, you can query the database and get the desired results. Now by using a find function, if you want to find any specific data, you can pass the conditions over in this object. So if you want to see the movies that have the rating 9 only, then you can pass rating 9. So what this does is it goes into the movies model and find the movies data that has the rating of 9. So now let's send a request from Postman. So inside of get all movies, let's send the request. And now you can see only the movies that have a rating of 9. So for now, as we need all the data, let's remove this condition and then save our file. So now let's work on another route, get single movie. So let's copy this code and paste this code inside of get single movie. And now we will be renaming this function. So from get all movies, control D for multi cursor, and then get single movie, right? Now if you navigate into the Postman and see the movies.db dummy API, and inside of it get single movies, you can see that at the end of this request we are sending a dynamic value. So let's create a route for this. So navigate into your app.js file, and in this part of the code we'll be writing an API endpoint for getting a single movie. So app.get, if anyone sends a request to /API/movies and then the dynamic ID, and now for declaring the dynamic ID we should start the ID with a semicolon and then the movie underscore ID. Now by sending this, we are declaring that if anything comes after the movies, then this route will handle the request. So if someone lands in this route, the request will be handled by get single movie. Right? Now let's save this. And in get single movie, let's modify the response for now. Let's comment this out. And then in data, let's comment this out as well. And hello from get single movie. Get single movie. So let's try to send the request from our Postman. So let's duplicate this, and the name of this will be get single movie. And in request URL, our URL method is the get method, all right. And the request URL will have a dynamic ID after the movies. So let the dynamic ID be a random ID for now, and let's send the request. Now it is saying hello from get single movie, so our route is working fine. Now what we need to do is we need to grab this dynamic ID and then show the data accordingly. So for getting this ID, we can look into request.params. So console.log request.params. So if I send a request from the Postman, in console I can see that I have got an object, and inside of object there is a movie ID. Now this movie ID, this key of movie ID is the movie ID that we have written here. So if I rename this to ID, and if I save this route and send the request again from Postman, I can see that in my console I have an ID. So whatever you write here will be sent as a key in a param. So now that we have a movie ID as a param or as a dynamic ID, what we can do is we can uncomment this, remove this, uncomment this as well. So the data will be the movies data, and inside of the find we can apply a condition that underscore ID is the request.params.movie underscore ID. So let's save this and let's try to find an actual movie, right? So navigate into the Postman. First run the get all movies route so we can get the ID of all the movies. So if I specifically want this hangover movie detail, what I can do is I can copy this ID from our object and then I can pass this ID over here. And if I click at send, I can get the specific movie from this route. Now if you only want a single data from the model, what you can do is instead of running find, you can run find one function. So this will, instead of returning the array, it will return an object with a single data. So let's send this request, and you can see that in data there is an object with a single movie data. Now what happens if I provide an invalid ID that does not exist in our database? For instance, let's say 39 at the end of the ID. So if I send this, our code could not find the specific movie, so it returns null. And in most of the cases, this find and find one query does not throw an exception or error when they are unable to find the specific document. Instead, they will throw null or undefined as a response, right? So it is not necessary for you to wrap this code with try catch block, but you can still wrap it if you want to stay on the safe side. So let's do it anyways. So let's wrap it with try catch. So inside of this try we will wrap this whole statement, and if some error occurs, we will be handling this in a more graceful way. So let's copy this response, and inside of this, and after the response, we also need to return it, and the status will be 400, and status will be failed, and the response will be e.message. Data will be e.message, or message will be e.message. So you can wrap your find and find one code with this, but it is not super important, but staying on the safe side, let's do this anyway. So we need to do the same for find as well. So go ahead and wrap your code with try catch in get all movies as well. So this is how it should look like, and let's save the changes. If you send a request from Postman, the response will still be the same. And if something goes wrong, due to slow internet connection to Mongoose lost, then still our solver will not crash because we have handled the error in a graceful way. So let's return this as well. And also let's modify the response. So the status will be hello from get all movies will be changed to success. And also inside of get single movie, let's change this status to success. So this is how you query the database and get the desired result. Now in our next lesson, we'll be learning how we can update the movie data. So I'll see you there. In this lesson, we'll be learning about update operations on Mongoose. We'll be learning how we can modify the data that is already stored in the database. And for that, we'll be using the edit movie route. So let's go ahead and create that route. So inside of controllers, new file, and our file name will be editmovie.js, and inside of it an arrow function, edit movie, and module.exports equals to edit movie. Now we will be using the database operations, so why not change our regular function to async function. And the parameters we will be getting is request and response. Now let's save this code and navigate into app.js, and let's create a route for this as well. For updating the data or making changes in the database, we generally use patch request. So app.patch, and if someone sends a request with patch method into API/movies, then our edit movie will handle the request. So we have also imported the edit movie over here. So let's save this and let's try to send a request from our Postman. And before that, let's modify our edit movie so we send some response to the Postman. So rest.status 200, and JSON will be sending status hello from update route. Now let's navigate into the Postman and let's send a request. So navigate into the Postman, and you can duplicate this add a movie route. So let's duplicate it and rename it as edit movie, and then the post request method will be changed to patch request, and the API is the same. If someone send and request to API/movies in a patch method, then our patch movie will handle the request. And inside of a body, let's remove this first, and let's send a request to see if we are getting the desired response. So we have not started the server, sorry for that. So npm start. So after the server is started, into the Postman again, and let's send the request. So our route seems to be working fine and we are getting the desired response. So let's modify the route for now. So we will be using the database operations. So const mongoose is require mongoose, and inside of this function we will be initializing our model. So const movies model is mongoose.model of movies. Now if you look into the Postman and navigate to edit a movie route of dummy movies API, you can see that we are sending a JSON payload in our request, and inside of JSON payload you can see that there is a movie ID. Now the reason for sending the movie ID and why it is mandatory is that if a client is trying to make a change in a certain movie, we should be able to, or our API should be able to detect that specific data, right, in the database. Now if you have a look into our database, you can see that there are a lot of movies in our database. Now if you see the data of the movies, let's compare two movies for now. You can see almost everything is similar in these two data, but the only difference is the ID. Now in a model, this ID does not repeat and it is always unique. So it is the best way to detect the data that the user is trying to edit through an ID variable. All other things can be changed, but this ID cannot be changed. So we are detecting the request or ID of the movie from the request, and we will update the data accordingly. So let's set up that in our route. Now let's go ahead in our route and then destructure the data that we will be needing. So const, let's start the destructuring from request.body, right? And the things that we need, or the variable that we need for making the changes, one mandatory is movie underscore id that we will be sending from payload, and other variables are, let's see, our model. So what are the things that we want user to change? One is the movie name, info, and description. Also we might have forgot to write rating over here, so let's write rating as well. So our rating will be of type number, and it is capital numbers. Now let's select some of the data that we will allow our user to make changes to. So the movie name, info, rating, description. So we want everything. So movie underscore name, rating, info, and description. Now once we have that, we will be running update one query to update data in our model. So movies model dot update one, and by using update one function, we are instructing Mongoose to make changes to only one data in our model. So the update one will hold three objects inside of it. The first object will be the condition to find that specific data. Second will be the key value pair for updating the data, and third will be the configuration, right? Now in the first parameter or the first object, we will be trying to find the data that user is trying to edit. So for editing the data, user will be sending the movie ID, but in our movies model, our ID is underscore ID. So we will be assigning movie ID with the ID. So underscore ID is the movie underscore ID that user has provided. Now in the second parameter inside of this object, we will be writing the actual data that needs to be updated. So if a user is trying to update the movie name, then we will be writing movie underscore name is the movie name that is received from the payload. And in the last parameter, we will be writing run validators to be true. Now if you do not run validators, then this required validation will not work. So always make sure to use run validators true when you are trying to update the data in the database. Also we are trying to interact with the database, so this should be an await statement, and by using await statement we should be wrapping it with try catch as well. So try performing this action, and if it fails, then catch the exception, and then inside of it res.status 400.json, and inside of JSON we will have status failed, and the message is e.message, right? And then we also need to return this, otherwise request headers will be sent twice, response header will be sent twice. So let's save this and let's try to update data in our database. So navigate into the Postman, find the edit movie route, and inside of it we will be sending the payload data. So our first parameter will be the movie underscore id. So movie ID is the ID that we will be getting from the database, or that is stored in the database. So let's query get all movies, and this time we will be trying to make an edit to the best offer. So let's copy this, and inside of edit a movie we will be pasting this in our movie ID, right? Now the second parameter that we will be sending is the movie name that we are trying to edit. So movie underscore name is inside, instead of the best offer we will be writing the good offer. So the good offer. So if I send a request, you can see hello from the update route. Now let's modify this as well, but the data is already modified. So if you go into the get all movies and send a request, you can see that the best offer has been changed to the good offer, but our response is not correct. We are only writing hello from the update route, but instead of this, what you'll be writing is we'll be writing success, and then message is movie updated successfully, right? So let's save this and let's send the request again. So inside of get all movies, inside of edit movies, let's send the request. So movie updated successfully. Now let me write the good offer too, and inside of get all movies there is a good offer too. Now if I try to send the empty data in the movie name, then let's see what happens. So validation failed, movie name is required. So by using the run validators true, we are validating our updated data from our model. If I did not provide this, if let me comment this down, if I did not provide this run validators true, and if I try to send a request, it says movie updated successfully, and movie will be updated successfully without the movie name. Now this is not what we want, so we will be sending run validators true always, so that validations of our model works fine. Now let's see what happens when I try to update multiple fields. So will this request be able to accept the rating as well for updating the data? So what first, now if I see into the get all movies, I can see that there is an empty movie name. So let's fix that. So instead of empty movie name, let's modify it to the best offer. Let's send the request, and our data is showing the best offer over here. Now if I try to update the rating from the same request, will it work? So let me set the rating to 5 and send the request. So it's saying that the movie updated is successfully, but if I navigate into the get all movies and send a request, I can still see the rating to be 9. So our rating is not being updated. Now the reason for it to not update is we are not providing the updated rating in this object. So for fixing that, let's send the rating as well. So rating will be the rating. The info, also other variables, let's send other variables as well. So info will be the info, and description will be the description. So by doing this, we are updating all the variables. We are allowing user to update all the variables. So let's go ahead and try to modify the rating. So if I send 5, then the movie updated successfully. Let's query, and the rating is 5. Now I can use multiple data for updating my multiple fields or multiple payload data for updating my data. So info is this is best, and inside of description I'll be sending good job. Now let me send this request, and the movie is updated successfully. So let's see the response, and you can see that the movie is updated and we have got a new field over here, and this field is available here because the new schema has a definition for the description. And if there is a definition of the field in the schema and that field does not exist in the data, and if you try to update it, Mongoose will automatically add the updated data over here like this. Now what if I send a request from the Postman without the movie ID? So in the patch request, let me remove this movie ID and let me send a request. Now it says movie updated successfully, but it was not able to find any document, so none of the document or none of the data in our model was changed, because our code or our Mongoose code could not find the specified ID. So what we need to do is we need to reject this kind of request. So let's run our general validators at the above of this try catch block. So if movie ID is not provided, throw by saying that movie ID is required. And by throwing this, we are throwing in JavaScript exception. So let's try wrap it with try catch block. So try doing this and handle the exception in a graceful way. Let me copy this from here. Also, don't forget to return the statement, otherwise you will have an error. So failed, and our exception will be the E. So save this, and if you navigate into the Postman again, and if you try to send a request without the movie ID, it says movie ID is required. So this is how you make a change to the data in the database.
So in next lesson, we'll be learning how we can remove the data entirely from our database. So I'll see you there. So in this lesson, we'll be learning about how you can delete a data from the database using the delete query. For that, let's create a controller first. So new file, delete movie.js, and inside of it const delete movie, and module.exports delete movie. Also, we'll be using the database operations. So this will be an async function, and we'll be getting request and response as well. So let's create a route inside of app.js for delete operations. So if someone sends a delete method, app.delete method to /API/movies, then we will be executing the delete movie controller. Now in order to execute the delete operation, we must first find the movie data that user is trying to delete. Now in case of this patch request, we are obtaining the movie ID from the request.body payload, right? But in case of delete method, we do not have access to request.body, or delete method does not allow the body parameters to be sent in the request. So for getting the movie that we want to delete, we will be using the params like we did for get single movie. So movies slash the dynamic ID movie underscore ID. Now we will be able to access this in delete movie route using the request.params. So navigate into the delete movie, and inside of this, let's write response.send or response.status 200.json status success for now, and then message movie deleted successfully. Now movie will not be deleted for now, as we have not run any query, but for now let's read the params. So console.log request.params, and let's see if we are getting the movie ID. So navigate into the Postman, duplicate this patch request or any request that you want, change the method to delete, and remove the body, as we do not have access to this body in delete request. And then after movies, the dynamic ID. Now in this case, we will be trying to delete the end movie, this Stuart Little that is at the end. So let's copy this and let's rename this as well, delete movie, and then we will be sending this over here. And now let's send the request, and movie deleted successfully. Now if you see at the console, you can get the dynamic ID over here through request.params. So inside of request.params is an object, and inside the object there is a movie ID. So const movie underscore ID equals to request.params.movie underscore ID, right? So let's remove this. And for deleting the data from database, we should be using the delete function. But before that, let's import Mongoose. So const Mongoose is require Mongoose, and we'll be interacting with the schema model. So let's import model as well. So const movies model is mongoose.model, and inside of it we'll be writing movies, right? Now that we have an access to the model, we can use this model to execute a function of movies model.delete one. Now if we use delete many, then we can also delete the multiple instances, but for now we are trying to delete a single movie, so delete one. And inside of this delete one, we will have an object, and this object will hold the condition for finding that ID. So underscore ID is the movie underscore ID, and also use the await statement, as we already have async here, and then wrap this with try catch as well. It will not, in most of the cases, it will not throw any exception errors, but staying on the safe side, let's do that as well. So try catch an exception, and inside of it res.status 400.json status failed, and then message is e.message, right? Now let's try to delete a movie. So navigate into the Postman and send this request again.
So we're trying to delete the movie with 61D ID at the end. So get all movies, and this is the 61D ID, which is at the end, of course. Now let's query the get all movies. So you can see that our movie has been deleted. Let's try to delete this best offer as well. So copy this, go into the delete movie route, paste it over here and send. If you go into the get all movies, you can see that the best offer is also removed, and it is removed from here as well. So instead of 6, we will have in 4 data. So now what happens if you provide an invalid ID here that does not exist in our database? So let me remove this E and replace it with F, and let me send the request. Now it says that the movie is deleted successfully, but this ID did not exist in our database. Now the reason for it to say this is, in delete operation of Mongoose, if it could not find the specified ID like in find and find one, the error will not be triggered or the exception will not be triggered. Now if you want to write an exception or throw an exception, if there is no movie related with this ID, then what you can do is you can execute the find one function and then check for the movie whether it exists or not. So for that, what we can do is we can use the find one functionality. So right above this, what we need to do is const get movie and await movies model dot find one, and inside of it we will send the condition, same condition, and if the get movie does not exist, throw an error of this movie does not exist. So we are using find one and delete in the same route, and in most of the cases we will be using many operations in the same file. So let's try wrap it with try catch as well. So try doing this, catch an error or exception, and this rest.status 400.json, and then status failed, and message is E. Let's save this, and do not forget to return this. If you do not return this and if response is sent twice, you will get an error like error HTTP headers already sent. So save this code. Now navigate into the Postman, and if I try to send the invalid ID here, it says the movie does not exist. Now let's go to get all movies and let's query it again and find an ID that actually exists. So go to delete movie, paste this over here, send. The movie is deleted, and if I try to send this request again, then the request fails because movies is already deleted from our system. And this is how you perform the delete query in the database. And by doing this, we have completed our replication of movies DB dummy API. Now in the next lesson, we will be learning about the integration of OpenAI in this system so as to get the movie recommendations. That would be fun. So let's get started in the next section. I'll see you there. In this section, we'll be learning about integrating OpenAI into our app and prompting OpenAI for getting the movie suggestions. We'll start by installing OpenAI into our project. Then we'll be creating an OpenAI developers account. We will then generate our API key, and using the API key, we will be prompting OpenAI for providing us the movie suggestions that is based on the data of our database. It is going to be an exciting section. So let's go ahead and start integrating OpenAI for getting AI responses. So let's start integrating OpenAI into our system for getting the movie recommendations. So for this, we will be installing the npm package OpenAI. So you can search for the OpenAI in npm and open up your terminal and type npm install OpenAI. And this will bring the npm package OpenAI into your Node.js app. So now that OpenAI has been installed into our project, let's create a route that will handle the recommendation request. So in controllers, let's create a new file, movie recommendation.js. So inside of it, let's create a function. So const movie recommendation equals to an arrow function, and then let's export it. Module.exports equals to movie recommendation. So now that we have exported it, let's import it on app.js. So navigate into your app.js file and let's create a route here. So let me comment this as OpenAI suggestion. So let's create a route. So if anyone sends a request to app.get inside of API/movies and then get recommendations, our movie recommendations will be handling the request. Now there is an issue in this route, and the issue is this route will get confused with this get single movie route because the API endpoints are almost the same, or the request URL are almost the same. So /API movies, and then this is an dynamic ID, and if you send a request with get recommendation, our postman will treat this get recommendation as an single movie ID. Now let me demonstrate this in our postman. So navigate into your postman, duplicate any of these routes. So let me duplicate this get all movies and then rename this to OpenAI suggestion, and inside of it we'll be sending the request to /movies and then get recommendations, right? Let's save this and let's send a request. You can see there is an error. Although we are not sending anything from our movie recommendation, our postman is showing an error, and this error is being triggered by this get single movie because our Node.js app is being confused with this route and this route. So to avoid this, what we can do is we can modify our route a little bit, but before that let's send a response from our route. So we'll be able to assess request and response as usual, and then inside of this we can write response.status 200.json, and then inside of this status hello from OpenAI. Now this is the response that we are expecting. Now to modify the URL, what you can do is you can simply keep an OpenAI here. So by doing this, you are making your URL unique by providing an extra parameter over here. Now our Node.js app will not get confused with this and this route. So let's go ahead and add this in our Postman as well. So instead of movies/get recommendations, we'll be sending /OpenAI as well in our request. So let's send this. You can see that hello from OpenAI. So how we fixed this error was previously this API and this API endpoint were using the similar kind of address. Like this API was using API movies and get recommendations, and this was using API movies and then the dynamic ID. But when I introduced OpenAI here, I provided two parameters, but this is only expecting one parameter. So our Node.js app will skip this and it will move into this route. So by this way we have fixed this error. So let's save this. And now we are ready to work on OpenAI for getting the recommendation. But before that, we must create a free account on openai.com. So in the next lesson, we will be learning how we can create a free account on OpenAI and get our API key. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So now that we have installed OpenAI into our project and created the necessary routes, we are now ready to work on OpenAI. But before that, let's create a developer account on openai.com. So in your browser, go to openai.com and click at sign up. Now you can create your account using an email address, or you can use Microsoft, Apple, or Google account. So for now, I'm using the Google account. Now in most of the cases, when you sign up, you might see OpenAI is not available in your country, and if that's the case, you can always use the VPN to register your account. So now that you have registered, fill up this form. And you need to verify your number as well. So once you verify your number, this is the dashboard that you should be landed at. So click at API to see the API references. So you might be navigated to platform.openai.com. If not, you can navigate into here. And now for sending request to OpenAI, we must be generating our API key. So click at your account and click at view API keys. And then create a new secret key. And you can name your key. For now, I'll be writing testing key. And I'll be creating my secret key. So copy your key and place it somewhere in a safe place so that we can use it later. Now if you click at this uses, you can see your available limit on OpenAI. So currently OpenAI has granted me $5 credits. When you are creating a new account, they generally provide $5 credits to test the prompts. But I believe that this will be enough for us to test. But if you want to extend your limit, you can always upgrade your account. So now that we have a secret key, we can proceed to create an OpenAI request. And now go into the npm repository of this OpenAI, and then you can see the documentation of how we can integrate the OpenAI. So let me copy this code and let me paste this in our movie recommendation route. So we are importing the configuration in OpenAI from this OpenAI package. And the next step is to initialize our API key. So let's copy this and paste it inside of this function. And let's save this. And you need to replace this API, OpenAI API key with your API key. Now you can see that OpenAPI documentation has provided or has instructed us to use the environment variable to store our API key. So let's do that. So copy this and go into your env file, and then you can paste it over here, and this value will be our API key. So copy your API key from the place where you have saved this and paste it over here. And now you need to restart your server. So close your server with Command C and then npm start. Now again navigate into the documentation and then copy this completion code. So let's copy this and paste it in our VS Code. So paste it over here and then let's save this. As we are using await, this function will be async, right? Then let's save this. Now our OpenAI integration is almost complete. Let's play with it a little bit. Let's provide it some prompt and see the response. Currently we are logging in our response, so let's provide a prompt, and you can provide the prompt from here. So let me type give me 3 cat names. So let me save this and let me open up my Postman and let me send the request. So send, and let's see our console. So you can see that Tiger, Simba and Ariel is the response provided by the OpenAI. Now if you want to see the whole response of OpenAI, only keep completion.data and send the request again. So into the Postman and send the request. And here you can see the actual response provided by OpenAI. You can see that it has returned an object ID with key and value pair. You can see how much credit is used for this prompt request, and inside of these choices is the prompt response. And to see your overall credit usage, you can navigate into OpenAI and hit this UI usage. If you refresh this page, you can see what is your current credit limit. So you can see that sending 2 requests is equal to 0.01. So we can send a hell lot of requests over this. So by using the $5 free credit, you can play around with it as much as you like. So in the next lesson, we will be prompting OpenAI to generate us movie recommendation based on the movies saved in our database. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So in this lesson, we will be learning about prompting OpenAI for providing us movie suggestions based on the movies in our movies model. So first, let's remove all the data inside of movies model, because these are all the test data, and insert some of the movies that you like personally. And for inserting or adding the data, we will be using the add movie route. But for deleting the data, instead of copying this all ID and then deleting one by one, what we can do is we can delete it directly from here. So let's remove this and then populate this model with the movies that you want, that you like personally. So let's remove all of this and then let's add some movies. Now to check the response of OpenAI, I'll be sending only the movies that is animation related or that animated movies. So the first one is Stuart Little. Let's send this. Movie added successfully and it is available in our movies model or movies collection. And another movie that I want to add here is an epic movie. Let's send this as well. Another movie will be the Frozen movie. Let's send this as well. Another will be the Secret Life of Pets. And the last one will be the Toy Story. Sorry. Let's send this as well. So I have populated my movies model using only an animation movies. So let's see if ChatGPT or OpenAI can recommend some animation movies to me. So for that we need to create a prompt over here. So let me remove this console log, and I see this there is another console log as well. So let me search from overall everywhere. So console, by the way, you can search in every file from this search icon. So there is a console log. So let's comment this as well. And then navigating into movie recommendation, we will be needing the list of movies from this model. So for that, we need to initialize Mongoose over here. So const Mongoose is require Mongoose, right? And we are trying to access a movies model. So let's import movies model as well. So const movies model equals to mongoose.model movies. Now let's get all the data, all the movie data from our movies model. So for that, const all movies equals to await movies model dot find, and we will not be providing any condition over here so that all movie can be displayed. And let's console this, console.log all movies. Let's save this and let's see if we can get the list of all the movies in our console. So navigate into the Postman and then let's run this OpenAI suggestion route. Okay, now let's see our console. So we can see that we have got all the movies in our console. So this is working fine. So now what we need to do is we need to take all this movie name out from these objects. So const movies string equals to all movies dot map, and then inside of this will be an element, and for each element we want to provide el.movie underscore name. By doing this we'll only be getting the name. So let's console this movie string over here and let's send the request over again. So navigate into the Postman, send the request and look out for the console. So you can see that there is an array with all the movies, but it is an array, it is not a string. So what I want to do is I want to join this using an comma. So again let's console. So navigate into the Postman and send a request again. So you can see that I have got a list of movies from my database. Now let's build a prompt with this. So our prompt will be const prompt will be I need a movie recommendation based on these movies. So we'll be providing our movie name here. So movies string provide me, sorry, it should be inside this. So provide me with 10 suggestions, right? So let's console and see this prompt. Console.log this prompt prompt. And you can see that I need a movie recommendation based on these movies, and these are the list of movies, and I've written provide me with 10 suggestions. Now I will send this as a prompt over here, right? And here I want to log the results. So console.log completion, and then we'll be looking for completion.data. So let's save this and send the request again from Postman. Now if I send the request, and in the console you can see the response from OpenAI. We have got an object, and inside of the object there is a key called choices, and inside of it we have a text key in which there is a suggestion of the movies. So let's console that as well. So completion.data.choices, and most of the time we will be only needing the first data of array and then the text. So let's save this and send the request over again. And in console we have a list of movies, but seems like OpenAI has truncated the response. Seems like it is not providing us the full text, right? And the reason for that is OpenAI charges the API according to the length of response. So by not declaring the maximum length, our OpenAI is reducing the response on its own, right? So if you want to see the full response, you must be providing the max underscore tokens. So you are allowing the ChatGPT or OpenAI to deduct your token for getting the larger responses. Now in production environment, you must be serious about this, but in test environment, let's give them 100 tokens for now. Let's save this and send the request again. And there you have it, 10 movies suggested by OpenAI based on the data on our database. And seems like all of these are animated movies. Now let's again send request to generate even more movie suggestions. And there you have it. Now you can do this for multiple times until your credit runs out. Now let's send this data back into the response, right? So for that, let's copy this or let's cut this from here, remove this as well. And instead of status, let's write data or movies data or suggestions, right? And in place of suggestions, we are providing the suggestions from OpenAI. So let's save this and send the request. Now sending the request, and you can see the suggested movie in the response itself. But the data is not formatted well, so we will ask ChatGPT or OpenAI to separate this list of movies with comma. Separate movies with comma, right? Let's save this. Send the request again. And there you have a list of movies separated with comma. And this is how you prompt OpenAI for generating responses. But you almost forgot one very important thing, and the thing is wrapping this await statement with try catch block. Now we know that if we are using the await statement and if it throws an exception, then our server will crash, and for preventing it we need to wrap it with try catch block. Now we could have done this before, but mistakes were made. We forgot to wrap it with try catch. Now if we forgot to wrap it with try catch and if the exception is thrown, let's see what happens. So let me modify this model to use something that does not exist. So let's save this and let's send the request from our Postman. And there you can see our server has crashed because this model does not exist. And our nodemon is waiting for the file change to restart the server. Our app has crashed and it cannot handle any more requests. So this is not what we want. So we need to wrap this with try catch as well. So try doing this statement, and then if there is an error, catch an exception, and then we'll be sending the response.status 400.json status failed, and the message will be could not get recommendations. Also don't forget to return this. And now we still have an issue, and the issue is we have an completion inside of this try block, but we are trying to assess this completion outside from the try block, right? So this will throw an exception. So what we can do is we can cut this and we can paste it over here. Now let's save this and send the request again. So send, and then you can see our Node.js app has handled the error in a graceful way, and our server is also working fine. Now let's modify this model to use the correct model. So let's save this and let's try to get the suggestion again. So send, and there you have your suggestions. Now you can modify this prompt to display any results you want. So play with it, modify the prompt and see the response for yourself. The possibilities of prompting are endless. So explore on your own what you can do by integrating OpenAI into your system in the future as well. So this ends this section of OpenAI integration. So now that you have an idea, you can use this idea to create awesome apps using Node.js. So I'll see you at the next section. In this lesson, we'll be learning about Express Async Error package and how we can use this package for effectively handling errors in our Node.js app. By using this package, we can speed up our development process by more than 50% because it will remove the hassle of wrapping our code with try and catch every time. Now, if you look into our code base, you can see that at every route or every controller, we have wrapped our code with try catch block multiple times.
In every controller, we have used try catch so as to prevent our server from crashing if the exception or error is thrown. And therefore, our code is being more complex, and in the long run, it will be difficult to maintain. So we will be using Express Async Error package to effectively handle the error or exception thrown by our Node.js app, so that we don't need to wrap our code with try and catch block every time. By not using try and catch block every time for error handling, we'll be saving a lot of time, as you can directly throw an error and our Express Async Error package will handle the error for us. So let's go ahead and install that package. So open up your terminal and type npm install express async -errors. Now after installing the package, let's initialize it in our project. So for that, navigate into app.js, and this time we will be importing our Express Async Error directly into app.js and not on every route. So go to the starting of your app.js, and it must be the starting. If you import this file or this package after the Express, then it will not work. It must be at the starting part of your app.js file. So require Express Async Errors. So after initializing it, move to the part where you have declared the app as an Express app. So at this part, here we will be creating a handler for our error handling purpose. So let's create a handler first. New folder, and then name it as handlers. And inside of it, we'll create a new file, error handler JS. And inside of it, let's create an arrow function. So const error handler, and export this as well. Module.exports equals to error handler. Now we will be using this error handler to handle all the errors in our Express app. Now we need to import this error handler and use it in our app.js. So for that, you need to write app.use and then inside of it error handler. Also don't forget to import this, and you should make sure that this app.use error handler should be at the end of all the routes. So in my part of the code, it should be around here where all the routes are ended, so that if any of this route throw an exception or an error, this error will be handled by our error handler. So it should be at the end where all the routes have ended. So make sure it is at the end, and let's save this code. Now this error handler will be able to assess 4 parameters over here. The first one is error, and then the request, the response as previous, and then the next functionality. Right? These are the 4 parameters that the Express will provide to our error handler. Now inside of the error handler, what we are going to write is, if there is an error in our app, then we will be sending response with status of 400, and this will be our JSON response, and then in status we will be writing failed, and our message will be something went wrong. Let's write it for now and let's customize it later. And if there is no error, we want this code to proceed, so next function will run here. So what is this next functionality and what is this app.use functionality? So these are the parts of Express middleware. We have not learned about the Express middleware until now. And in this lesson as well, we will not be learning, because in our upcoming lesson, there is a separate lesson for this Express middleware for us to understand. And if I explain it to you now, it will be difficult for you to understand as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you a simple explanation of what this is. So app.use is we are using a certain functionality over here, and this next function is allowing our app to move further. Just understand this for now, and when we reach the middleware section, I'll revise this so you have a clear idea. So now we are ready to remove all the try and catch block from our app, right? So let's navigate into this add a movie first, and then let's remove this try and catch block. So remove this try and remove this as well. Now typically if you throw this kind of error and do not wrap it with try and catch block, our server will crash. But now that we have used error handler, let's go ahead and test this route. But first make sure that in your app.js error handler is moved at the end of all the routes.
So now we will see how our server will respond now that we have removed try catch block when we are throwing an exception. So navigate into the Postman on add movie route. So add a movie, and in this payload let's comment out this info key. If you see at our code, if there is no info in the requested body payload, then the exception is thrown of info must be provided. So let's test that. So info, we have commented out the info, so send the request. And there you have it, our server has not crashed and our error handler has successfully handled the exception errors. So instead of saying something went wrong, what we can do is we can display error over here. So the error is the error. So let's save this and let's navigate into the Postman again and let's send the request again. So send, and there you can see it, info must be provided. So our error handler is working perfectly fine and we do not need to wrap each and every part of our code with try and catch block. And this will help us write clean code, more maintainable code, and it will save our time in development. Also, you can remove this try and catch block that you have wrapped for the await statement. So we can completely remove all this try and catch block and let express async error do all the hard work. So let's save this and let's try to trigger an error from the Mongoose by not providing the movie name. Now we are not checking the movie name using a general validation. Instead, what we are doing is we are checking the movie name as a required item from the model itself. So if someone tries to create a movie without a movie name, then the Mongoose must throw error. And let's see if our error handler can handle the error thrown by Mongoose, that is using an await statement. So navigate into the Postman, uncomment this info and comment this movie name. So save this and try to send a request. So you can see our error is being handled gracefully. Our server has not crashed, and then you can see the actual error over here. But it is not formatted well. So let's make some changes in our error handler. So in our error handler, if there is an error and if there is an error dot message inside of our error, then we will be sending an response which has error dot message, right? And if it does not have message, then we will simply provide a response with an error only. So let's save this. Take your time to understand this code. In this code we have written if the error object or the error or the exception has a message key in the object, then we will be showing that message like we did in a previously in our mongoose errors. So in mongoose error there was a message key in our error, so we displayed error.message. But in our own exception where we triggered a throw statement, where we provided a throw statement, we were only displaying this exception. So in our error handler, what we are writing is if there is a message key in the error, then display the error message, and if there is no message, then simply display the error. Now this error handling function will handle most of the errors. So let's navigate into the Postman and let's send this request again. So you can see there is a beautiful error message, not so much beautiful, but it is kind of a beautiful. So it says that the movie validation failed, movie name is required. And if I modify my payload to send the movie name but not the info name and trigger our own exception, then it says that the info must be provided. So in most of the cases, this error handling code will work fine. And if it does not, you can always console the error and see where exactly the error message is, and you can format it in your own way. But let's leave it as it is now. So now what you can do is you can remove try catch from all of our code and make our code easier to read. So we have removed the try catch block from add movie. So let's go ahead and delete movie as well and remove this try and catch block here as well. Let's remove this. See the difference that it has made in our code. In edit movie as well, let's remove this try and catch block and this as well. Let's save this. Inside of get all movies, let's remove this as well. Let's save this. In get single movie, let's save this. And in movie recommendation, also here we are using an create completion function with an await statement in OpenAI. Our Express async error is capable of handling all these kind of thing without try catch, so remove this as well. So now if you test any of this route, our server will not crash as all the errors will be handled by our Express async error. And there is one last thing that should be done. So navigate into your error handler, and inside of this if error statement, you should console.log the actual error. You are displaying this error, a beautiful error message for your users or for your clients, but you should be able to see the actual error. So if an error occurs, your user will see the customized error message, but you will still be able to see the actual error message in your console. So let's try this. Navigate into add movie route. Don't provide the movie name so that the Mongoose exception will occur. So if I send this, you can see that there is somewhat of a beautiful message over here. But if you see your console, you can see the exact error that is thrown here. The server has not crashed, but it has consoled our error. So you can see that the movie validation failed and all these different kind of stuff in your console log. So you can easily debug your code. And that's the way of handling the error in an effective way. This will increase your productivity and help you code faster. Now we have reached the end of our movies API. From the next section, we will be starting a new project called Expense Tracker Pro, where we will be utilizing all the things that we have learned until now, and we will learn many things over there as well. So from the next section, we will dive in a little bit more. So I'll see you there.